Okay, I'm just going to wait a minute or two more since, as Greg said, they don't let anybody into the meeting until right at 3. So I just want to give the attendees a chance to raise their hand if they have a public comment that for an item that is not on the agenda. I want to be really militant at this meeting to really only allow people to speak on something that is not on this agenda. So anything that's a comment about Meadow or Charleston or Churchill and the matrix and the fact sheets should be kept to item 4. Any comments you might have on XCAP's process should be kept for item 3. So this is for not those things. And so hopefully that will limit the amount of public comment that we have at the start of the meeting so we can get right into it. I see I somehow convinced one person to drop a hand, so I appreciate that.
Should I do roll call, Nadia?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, Gregory Braille.
I'm here.
Phil Burton.
Here.
Tony Carrasco.
Oh, his audio is not working, but he just arrived.
Okay. In-Young Cho.
I don't see her yet.
Larry Klein.
Here.
Patricia Lau.
So Patricia Lau is officially off starting July 1st, which is today.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Adina Levin.
Not here yet.
Okay. Nadia Naik.
Here.
Keith Reckdahl.
Here.
Dave Shen.
Here.
Carrie Templeton.
Here.
And I did see that In Young just joined. Hi, In Young.
Okay, good.
Okay, cool. Great. Well, welcome everybody. We are going to start with oral communications. Again, for the members of the public, if you'd like to speak to an item that is not on the agenda, if you could please raise your hand virtually. We'll be giving everybody 2 minutes. Again, this is if you have anything to say about Meadow, Charleston, and Churchill, either the matrix summaries or the fact sheets, please save that for item number 4. And if you want to talk about XCAP's timeline or our deliverables or the memo, that would be under item number 3. So this communication time is for things that are not those things. So if you've got anything outside of that, you can speak now during oral communications. So I'll turn it over.
Okay. Thanks, Nadia. I see one person who would like to speak at the oral communications. Oh, actually, there are no more hands raised, so no one at this time.
Okay. All right. Thank you for all being mindful of that. We really appreciate it. Okay, so the first item on our agenda, or the next item on our agenda, then is item number 3, which is review of the XCAP timeline and the deliverables. So as you saw in the memo that I wrote to XCAP, I've heard from a few people that there's concerned about how much longer our XCAP timeline is going. And for those of us who are original members of the CAP, we have been going strong for over 2 years now. So going on way beyond that, I know is a real stretch of the amount of service that we normally ask folks who are participating on these kinds of committees. And so I wanted to agendize this item to make sure that the group can kind of give their opinions and frankly can give their commitment, for how much longer do we have you guys? And if we can't go all the way to the end as expected, that's okay. And offer us an exit strategy that still takes care of the work. So I wanted to open it up first for each member to kind of go around and give me their thoughts. What are you thinking? How's it going? What's your situation? And then eventually we'll try to do a vote on one of the 3 options that I proposed, and those could be modified. I just threw a straw person out so we could throw darts at. But I guess I will go alphabetically. Will probably be the easiest way. So Greg, that makes you first.
It wasn't clear from your memo. I'm looking at the spreadsheet. You have 3 options. Basically, sorry. So for me personally, no, nothing's changed in my life that would make participating any more difficult, and I'm not expecting anything is going to change between now and October. We're not moving, not going on any long trips, anything. Yeah.
I meant to clarify. So the calendar options, in case it's not clear, is that we would have weekly meetings for usually 3 hours. Let's face it, we keep trying to book 2 hours, but we end up with 3
Yeah,
hours.
it's 3.
So it's basically 3-hour meetings through whichever is the option that you're looking at. So I just wanted to clarify and make sure people are kind of aware of that. And
It's a heck of a lot of weekly meetings.
Yeah.
But I would like to see the process through to making an actual recommendation.
Okay.
So it wasn't clear to me whether the third option has multiple days for deliberation.
Right.
The first 2 options don't. So either we'll all quickly agree, or we'll all take a vote and agree to disagree. But I would like to have the option that ends up with us making an actual recommendation to the council, preferably one recommendation for each location.
Right.
And sort of some text on, if you don't believe us or don't like our recommendation, here's some things to consider about the ones that you might choose instead. So if that means taking until November, then we should take until November. I certainly hope it doesn't drag on. And I know there are external pressures of budget and COVID and Caltrain, but this group is together. This group has been discussing this for a long time. And I think we need to see the process through as a group as much as we can, because a year or 2 from now, who knows what any of our situations will be.
Great. And just for a point of clarification, so what option 2 proposes is eliminating, so to the extent that we can agree on eliminating on alternatives, for example, we've already as a group decided not to discuss the South Palo Alto tunnels, that's what would be included, but we wouldn't try to come up with a single recommendation for any of the alternatives under option 1 or option 2. So you did get that from my memo and from the graphic, it seems like, correct. So
then I think option 3 is the one that I would advocate for, even though it's a lot of meetings.
Great. Phil. Phil, I think you're muted because it looks like you're talking, but.
Sorry about that. I was rereading the memo, and I had that up on my screen. To be honest, I'm very torn. I think option 1 is not desirable, but in my own mind, I can create arguments for either Greg's point or the option 2 point. So let me sort of just put the arguments out for everybody else to consider. On the one hand, I think as a group, we're probably reaching the point of fatigue, as evidenced by the dropouts. And I know personally, I'm beginning to feel a little sort of meeting out. And I'm retired, so I have more time than some other people do. On the other hand, I feel like we've got an amazing group body of knowledge, and I'd be ashamed to dissipate that without using that group knowledge as much as possible. The other concern I've got against rushing to a judgment of any sort is the Caltrain process, which will be, I imagine, starting soon and running for some period of months. I don't know how many. And my concern about the Caltrain process is that it could moot some of our decisions to the point where the city council says, now that we see what Caltrain intends to do, we don't like anything XCAP did, or we want to reconstitute XCAP in some other form and reevaluate our options in light of the Caltrain decisions. So super ideally, the Caltrain decisions would come in time for us to incorporate them into our discussions. Super ideally. Is that realistic? I don't know. And I'm also concerned about the fact that we might have some more attrition between now and, let's say, the completion of option 3. So I can't do a firm vote at this time, except to eliminate option 1.
Okay.
I'm sorry if I took too long.
Oh, no, it's fine. And I just want to be clear. You don't all have to tell me exactly where you're voting. I just want to hear from you kind of what are your general thoughts, and did you have tweaks to the options, that sort of stuff. So I just want to make sure I should have made that clear from the beginning. I apologize. Tony, it's your turn.
So I like Greg and Phil. I'm torn. I know option 1 is not really desirable because we have too much knowledge to just stop here. Option 2 sort of is a compromise between 1 and 3, and I sort of like it. I think that option will move us along to a place where we can summarize our thoughts, and we're very close to it, I think. I think though the solutions need more community input, and we get good ideas about how to tweak them. And so I think 2 is where I sort of land, but I'm open to other people's opinions, especially yours, Nadia, and Larry Klein. I think you guys know much deeper stuff than I do, at least. And so if you can guide us as to what your thoughts are, it would be quite valuable for me.
Well, thanks for the vote of confidence in my opinion, Tony. Larry, your turn.
Let me start out by saying option 3 is the status quo. So it's not an option. It's where we've been for those of you who've been on it for 2 years. It's where we've been, at least since the city council changed the mission. So to me, it's whether we continue on that mission or make some change. And I feel very strongly that we ought to stay the course. It makes me think of guidance from my parents, from teachers, coaches, whatever. Finish what you start. I think we all heard that lesson down through the years. And I think that if we didn't finish, we would not be doing what we should be doing. All of you put in a tremendous investment, and I think that should be completed. But if the community is also, through the city council, made a big investment in us. It was at our urging that the council has expended more money to explore the 3 alternatives that we urged them to do. And I think we would not be justifying that faith in us if we abandon that cause right now by saying, well, we wanted to study that, we wanted to give you a recommendation on it, but now we're not going to. I think the most overriding concern, though, is that this group has far more expertise than any other people in town. Maybe the city council members who ultimately review this will get close to that, but I don't think they're going to put in the same amount of time. I'm quite sure they're not going to put in the same amount of time that this group has. And I think that we would be abandoning our responsibilities if we didn't complete that. We have this tremendous investment. I think several of the members of the public have also pointed the same argument out, that this group has a wealth of knowledge, and it's not sufficient for us to just say, well, here are some things we learned, and you might want to consider this, and you might want to consider that. That type of answers, I don't think, carry much weight. People might ultimately disagree. City council might also disagree with whatever our recommendations are, but it really sharpens people's thinking when you're dealing with a recommendation, not just nice pros and cons. So I think if we really want to justify the amount of time and effort and money from our fellow citizens, we really need to stay the course and make the recommendations. I am sensitive to people's personal concerns, and I think that we ought to look to how we can save some time. And if the meeting times are a problem, if people want to meet in the mornings, I'll be there. If people want to meet in the evenings, I'll be there. If people want to meet on Saturdays or even Sundays, I'll be there. So I think that we should have the flexibility to accommodate people who might have personal problems. One way we can move up the schedule, and I really hate to say this because I've been very much in favor of the town halls, but I'm very disappointed with the schedule that the city staff is coming up with on the town hall meetings. I think it really delays things, and it may be that even though I wanted to hear from the public on town halls, heard from the public in a variety of ways, and maybe we just should not worry about that anymore and move ahead and come to our own conclusions, recommendations, and not try to schedule around the town hall. But in any event, I think we need to stay the course.
Thank you, Larry. My apologies to In Young. I'm having trouble with my alphabet today. So In Young, you should have been before Larry. So In Young, please go ahead.
Sure. I don't really see. I'm in favor of 3, except my concern is that, we kept pushing our deadline again and again and again. So it feels that we don't really have accomplishment. I mean, I do, like, subcommittees and other people have lots of reports done and stuff. So my part, I know I still have to write a report with Dave, but I think we should have some accomplishments, which is the recommendation, right? So if we could do it sooner, I mean, we can continue, but so it's an option 3 is like a town hall, like we doing report in December, right? November, December.
Yeah. So there is some fudge factor in terms of what Larry was saying, whether or not we would have, we would wait to start deliberations until after the town halls. I think what I heard Larry say was, well, maybe we deliberate without any town halls.
Yeah.
But it then means weekly meetings straight through, which options 1 and 2, they're meetings every 2 weeks.
Right.
And so and the other thing to keep in mind is, it's not just ultimately about getting to a final answer and delivering, but our ability to write the reports in that time. So the different sections and that. And so based on whatever we'll choose next week, I'll be scheduling then, based on our option, what is the different sections of the report? And it may not change if we stay with option 3, or it may change if we go with option 1 or 2. But that's, part of the question here that's sort of embedded is, what is everyone's personal availability to be able to write? And for example, under option 2, be able to come to something, write this report between August and September and get an answer versus later.
Yeah, I'm available. So, I don't have any particular restriction on deadlines in July or December. I would still want to participate in this process. And I think, so if that's the case, I'm good with option 3.
Okay. Great. Let's see. Dina's not here. So Keith.
Yep. Hello. Yeah. Personally, nothing in my life will be changing to make XCAP more difficult, but nothing will be changing to make it easier either. And weekly meetings, especially for someone who's working, is not trivial. But my biggest concern, though, is we don't know the question that we're answering. There's a lot of financial uncertainty about COVID, but even more so the fact that there's uncertainty with Caltrain. And particularly the Caltrain studies that's been going on, that could totally change the answer. Like Phil said, we could end up, all our work could be moot. And, if we push to finish, we may be finishing the wrong race. So I would be inclined to have option 1 or 2. We have learned a lot. We should document that as well as possible and answer the question when the question is clear. Right now, we're ahead of Caltrain, and that's not a good position to have, because we could be spending money and spending time on something that's meaningless.
Okay. Thanks, Keith. Dave.
Echoing a lot of what people said, I think having been a CAP member and now ex-CAP, there's been so much time and effort put into this process. I hate to have it kind of come to a fuzzy conclusion. I'd probably vote for going to whatever time it takes to get to what we originally intended to come out of this. So, and as far as personal time, I don't, the big factor actually is August 15th when the schools reopen. And depending on what that looks like, that could mean I have a full-time job, keeping my kids going to school. And so I already pinged Yin Young to say hey, I'm free to do a lot of writing between now and August 15th, but I am not sure what's going to happen after school's open. And one factor would be, like, say, this meeting time at 3 o'clock could be in jeopardy because of when school gets over and have to deal with after school stuff. So later times and another time might also have to work for me. But I can at least attend the meetings. Not sure about the writing effort after August 15th. But yeah, I'd love to see us get to a better conclusion versus just a fuzzy one.
Okay. Thank you. And Carrie.
A lot of the points that I wanted to make were addressed already. The limitations in the community participation model because of our shelter in place gives me pause. I am concerned about the schedule changes in August that Phil and Dave mentioned. Also, should just let you know the PTC meetings are also on Wednesdays. So if we do go to every week model, I'd have a hard stop at 6 o'clock. And that would be for anyone, even if I were to swap out with someone else, which I'm not planning to do, but just to let you know, everybody on the PTC has that same conflict. I also agree with a point that Keith made about the changing landscape. That really concerns me because we are charged with using, we did ask for the extra money. Larry mentioned we asked for the extra money. And if we're researching something that's changing so rapidly or that we don't know what's going to be the outcome, then are we spending that money wisely, right? So I'm just a little concerned about that. And agree with David that we should front load the writing part as much as possible before the kids are back in school for those of us with younger children. So in abstract, so those are the comments that I had notes on, but in abstract, I do want us to come to a conclusion and really think thoughtfully about the context of our recommendation, because so much has changed since the CAP and the XCAP were formed. So, I think there's more than a schedule behind this memo, right? What it is, are we evaluating our purpose or reevaluating our purpose given that there's so much changing context? Is that really what you're getting at?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I'll get into my comments in a sec, but yes, I mean, I think it was both trying to be responsive to each person's sort of shifting timeline and, not knowing what August brings in terms of those who have young kids and are going to be homeschooling. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot has shifted. It's unfortunate that we weren't able to get Caltrain. We won't have our Caltrain discussion until next week because that may also have shed some more light on this conversation. But I think, our budget and the ability to do some further work to be able to refine some of these things also is going to impact, our ability to kind of move forward on these things.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's great that we're having that discussion. So just to be clear on the availability of time and the commitment to this effort, I'm hearing a lot of strong support. I also am available and committed to this effort.
PTCs, remind me, are Wednesdays from every Wednesday, or when are they?
Every other Wednesday. I think it's the second and last Wednesday of every month, but I can send you a list. We have the dates.
Yeah. And you're on break now, or how does that work?
We do not break. We are not the council. So yes, the show must go on. So I'll send you the whole schedule and we can take a look at it. But I so far, if we maintain the 3 p.m. and we have a 3-hour meeting, that shouldn't be a problem. And yeah, so it's a lot of work, but I think, all of us are very invested as well, right? We want to see it through and have a product we can be proud of at the end, and to have a recommendation that is helpful for the city. We do need to, I would love to hear a little bit more robust discussion about the changes and the changing landscape beyond just the schedule part. So I don't know if that's part of how you want to.
Sure, we can get into those things. I think whatever we need to discuss to be able to come to this decision is important.
Okay, thank you. That's all my comments for now.
Thanks. All right, so I'll kind of give my my first thoughts, and then we can get into kind of some of the more substantive things of what we think we ought to do. And if there's a way, we can also tweak some of these options to sort of, as Larry already proposed one idea, which is maybe do option 3, but cut out the town halls, or not wait for the town halls, not cut them out, because that's actually the city's party, if you will. But for my part personally, I've been working on this for 2 years, and I have been was certainly one of the people instigating the formation of a community advisory panel. So this is an item that's near and dear to my heart. But I'm also very aware of the amount of time all of you guys have given to this, and I'm worried about, frankly, wearing out the entire committee. And we haven't even gotten to so it has been hard to sit through these long meetings and go through all this technical stuff, but we haven't even worked on the hard deliberations piece. And I do have some reservations about how that's going to work via Zoom. I think it's hard to do this kind of thing via Zoom. But I don't, the option 2 that I proposed is the one that I think I'm most comfortable with, partly because even though the council has asked us to give a final recommendation, I think that being able to eliminate some of the alternatives is still a win for the council. And frankly, also, it doesn't, if we came up with a perfect technical solution, and as you guys know, there isn't a really obvious winner on a lot of these, there's a lot of consternation about whether this is being done in the right environment, whether we've had the right public process as a result of the pandemic, whether we've had the right outreach process that we would normally do just generally. The fact that Caltrain's future is sort of unknown at this point, and frankly, the budget implications of not necessarily being able to do what we would like to have done under normal constraints. I mean, the landscape has shifted significantly, in my opinion, and so I feel comfortable with being able to go back to council and say, look, here are the alternatives we were able to eliminate, and I think in the schedule I baked in some time to see if there's any other. We never really got to discuss Churchill, so if we could come to at least eliminating one of the alternatives for Churchill, then that narrows it down to 2. And I do think that it's not just about listing pros and cons going forward. I think it's about giving the council potentially a very detailed list of what are the things that, when Caltrain is starting their process, that they need to get some meat on the bone for, and the kinds of things that would be useful for the city of Palo Alto to look at going forward. I also think that that there's a lot of there's some process stuff that we still haven't had a chance to do. So I'm not comfortable with the bike and pedestrian feedback that we've gotten so far.
Later, okay?
Phil, can you mute yourself? That'd be awesome. Thank you. I don't feel like we've had enough time to have the bike and pedestrian stuff on the new alternatives get the kind of level of detail that we'd like to get. And in order to do that, that really drags on the schedule. And so I don't feel comfortable saying, putting this out there and making any final decisions when we're not really going to get the level of detail and that sort of stuff. So that's kind of where I am on this one. But, wanted to hear from all of you guys. I'm cognizant of, Carrie's got one set of time issues, we've got others, and we're certainly flexible on, as Larry proposed, we can work on weekends, we can work, at other times, early in the mornings, whatever the group thinks. But I really wanted to hear from the group and understand both a commitment to the schedule, but a commitment to be able to write the sections of the report, because ultimately we have to write this ourselves, right, based on what we're doing. And I need to understand whether that's possible. So with that, does any other ex-capper want to say something else? You can raise your hand virtually or visibly. Tony, sure. And then Larry.
So, yeah, I sort of agree with what Larry was saying. I think we need to finish what we started. And so that's where I stand. My time is available as long as it's scheduled sometime in advance and I'm not having any problems attending these meetings or working more. I think at this point we've identified a lot of data and we have not sifted it through to rank them in terms of how do they score in terms of all of the other criteria, or yeah, and in the sense that we need to be able to get some of this digested and a product come out that can come out. And I think a face-to-face discussion would be much more appropriate for this kind of task. So that's what I have to say. I would support, I think it's number 3 or some version of 2 and 3, which is finish what we started.
Sure. Well, to get to full deliberations, the thing is that what we originally thought was we would, for example, we'd talk about Churchill and we would have weekly meetings until we finished whatever the ultimate recommendation was. And then we'd take a week break and then we would go to deliberating for Meadow and Charleston, with the idea being we're trying not to break the rhythm and trying to stay and be able to get through the alternatives. But the way that works out in the calendar, I mean, it's roughly probably a good 5-6 weeks of steady every week, 3 hours. And so, you know, Larry suggested that we could potentially start before the town halls, which means we could do stuff in August, but that means we've got to have a commitment from the group basically through September. And I just want to make sure that that's really what works. Tony? Yeah.
Nadia, I'm wondering what the deadline is for December. If Caltrain is doing their plan, wouldn't it be better if we staged it, I mean, spread the meetings out to go past when they come up with their plan?
Well, I think what I'm being sensitive to, Tony, is that as much as folks want a resolution, they also don't want this to drag on necessarily for too many more months. And I think Caltrain's plan, they're still scoping out their work, but I believe one of the early discussions I heard was it's going to take them at least 2 years probably between the time they scope their work and then figure out what they need, you know.
Okay.
Larry? And then Greg?
Yeah, a few comments on the other comments. First, I want to say I'm very encouraged by the fact that as I heard people talk, I think there's a commitment from everybody that one way or another they're going to finish their commitment to the community and serving on the board. So I think that issue is sort of not an issue, that we do have a commitment time-wise, so people may have different views as to what we ought to be doing. And in response to a couple of things that were said, particularly on whether there's been a change in the environment. I think the answer for our purposes is there hasn't been. Our environment is the city we live in and the geometry and the geography that we're working with. Those aren't going to change. Churchill and Charleston and Meadow are where they are with the constraints of the railroad tracks and the high school and so on and so forth remain the same. That Caltrain may be doing something different, which I'm not quite sure that they really are. I've always assumed that Caltrain was going to be an issue, and I think everybody else has as well. And that they've been talking for quite some time that they're going to get their act together. But I think it's just the reverse of what we're talking about when somebody says we want to worry about Caltrain. I think that our electeds are going to have to negotiate a lot with Caltrain, and that we're far better off as a community if the community has come to a decision as to what our preferred alternatives are. To just start talking with Caltrain somewhere down the line, I think this means a repeat of what we have been doing here on the XCAP without the background and all the work that's been put into it. But also, I think it also puts the future city council sort of behind the 8 ball if the council hasn't already determined what our preferred alternatives are. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to get our preferred alternative. There's always going to be a lot of negotiation. That hasn't changed. So I think that we ought to stay the course and not come up with arguments that I don't think really have any basis in actual fact. And again, let me mention one that I mentioned other weeks. Both parties talk about a big infrastructure bill. It keeps getting delayed, but maybe this is the year it happens. And if it does, we want to be ready to go forward with what our ideas are to And if we postpone things and don't have a preferred recommendation, we may be behind at the end of the line and not get what we want. So I say move forward.
If I can, thanks, Larry. I really want to concur with what you just said. I also want to say that, and I guess you'll have Caltrain here talking to you, I think, next week. But, my early conversation with Caltrain, they really think that the process that we're going through is actually going to help inform the process they're getting ready to go through. So a lot of the issues that we're bringing up and that this group has been bringing up is going to be stuff that they're going to use to inform their corridor process. So I think that, first I want to step back and I can't remember who, but somebody said they feel like the XCAP hasn't been achieving anything, but I think you've been achieving a lot. So I think there's a lot of value in what you've been doing and the work that's, still ahead. So I think, just to add on to what you said, Larry, I think that the work that you've been doing really will provide a valuable path forward for both the Caltrain process and potentially for any funding opportunities that we see, in the future.
Could I say something in response to what Philip just said?
Sure.
Okay. The fact that the comment that Caltrain is actually looking at our work as guidance for their own work, that's news to me. And that kind of changes my perspective a lot, because that says that we have an opportunity to set down some markers, as opposed to my earlier assumption that Caltrain was going to go ahead, ignore what we said, do whatever they want to do, and then say, here it is, Palo Alto, take it or leave it. That's what my assumption was when I made my earlier comments. Philip's comments just totally upends that assumption.
Yeah, well, I guess I should caveat to say that doesn't mean that they'll agree with, what our ultimate recommendations are, or the ultimate recommendations for how we, recommend either constructing or, construction methods or, things that are outside of their, I guess, standard guidance or whatever their standard construction recommendations are. So I cautiously say that, but I think they definitely do feel like they are learning something or will be learning for something. And also something I want to mention that was discussed earlier is the thought that this Caltrain process is going to move ahead really, really quickly. I just want to caution on that too. I think the Caltrain process is going to be a little bit drawn out. So I wouldn't anticipate it happening really quickly. I do know that they're going to actually have to hire somebody for that project, and they haven't even started that process yet. So ultimately, it could take a while. And keep in mind that they're coordinating. They're not just going to be looking at Palo Alto. They're going to be thinking about the corridor. It's a corridor-wide study, and I think they've got like 42 crossings they need to consider, and probably a few other things as well.
Yeah. So on Caltrain, I've got to imagine that they're going to have a lot of the same conversations we're having. So having the city of Palo Alto having said, hey, we had a committee of citizens spend 2 years learning about and talking about the options for this project, and they concluded that X is an alternative we can live with and Y is not, or they're all equally bad, but Z is slightly less bad, then I got to think that's going to help. And I got to think it's going to help the city of Palo Alto, especially if the city council adopts our report and actually votes on something to say, hey, a new council may want to ignore the previous council, but saying, hey, I mean, just like apparently I've read that apparently high-speed rail is, Palo Alto is officially opposed to high-speed rail. I've lived here for 10 years and I don't remember that. So it's one of these things, having some precedent might help. Two other perspectives. The money thing is a real chicken and the egg thing, and it will kind of help if someone could help us understand it, because one of the things that the city said in their criteria was fundable by existing funding sources. Even before COVID, none of these alternatives were fundable by existing funding sources. So, and then we've had people like Larry in the past say, well, you have to come up with a preferred alternative so the council can go to whomever and ask for money. So I don't know. I don't know what to do about that. I just have a slight sense of frustration as we're told that money is an object, and we've made some decisions based on money, which I think were good decisions. But it's really hard to understand what the possible options are. No one has ever come to us and says there is a funding source big enough to pay for any of these options we're considering, except maybe for closing Churchill. And I have one more thing to say, which is, and then I'll stop, which is, and I'm sorry about 3 topics in one comment, but Nadia mentioned a few times, we want to get more details, we want to get more details. I'd like us to find a way to be clear on the level of abstraction we have to work at. We could have a report for the city council much sooner if we're willing to say we operated at a certain level of abstraction and we don't know exactly where every bike lane will be. We don't know if the tunnel for one of the options would be at Kellogg or Seal. We don't know whether the bike lane would be 10 feet wide or 12 feet wide, or whether it would have green stripes or blue stripes. But we know that in general, we've seen a design for alternative X that at the level at which we're looking at it now, it either looks feasible or it looks infeasible. As opposed to, I think what people in the public are expecting from us is I think they're expecting that like we are designing the grade crossing and we're going to be the ones who decide exactly where each curb cut and exactly where each bike lane and each ramp is going to be. And I think if they want that, then it's going to take at least until November. And I think that we could possibly get a recommendation to the city in less time if we're willing to say, given what we know now, we're not going to have perfect information. And the AECOM has been telling us for 2 years that we're actually asking for more details at this level in planning stage than they're used to providing anyway. Is there any way we can kind of raise our level of abstraction a bit and take a leap of faith and saying, this alternative looks feasible and this alternative looks infeasible, and therefore we have a recommendation without having to have so many details ironed out, because they're going to change later. So anyway, so 3 points. I'll stop talking. Thanks.
I see Dave's got his hand up.
Those are great points, Greg. To follow on your point 3 and then jumping back to 2 a little bit too.
Sorry.
Oh no, that was great. I didn't have to say all that. You said it for me. But first on 3, I'm thinking that no matter what we do, there's going to be these open questions, and they may actually cause more than one alternative to be recommended, and potentially conditionally, right? Like, let's say we had $1 billion fall into our pockets. Oh, well, you know, that could mean more things could be done and not others, right? Instead of others. But we don't know. And I think there's, so we should consider potentially that we may end up with more than one, and that's okay. We're okay with that. And we may want to spell out the conditions. And then the other one was specifically on your 2, which you were talking about funding sources. I too had written that down as, hey man, we're never going to know, right? It's like, we don't even know what the threshold is for existing sources. And then is there going to be a huge infrastructure bill or whatever? We don't know. And that could change the equation for a lot of things, instead of just saying, well, we should be cheap, right?
Or we should be reasonable. I mean, I kind of feel a little bit
well,
like
what's reasonable though, right, Greg?
Yeah, right. So
Yeah,
I kind of feel I feel a little bit like we're a jury and the judge hasn't given us really clear instructions.
Yeah. Well, so my point though,
and the city council's the judge, right?
Well, I think though, to your point though, it may result in more than one getting voted, and we should be okay with that.
So Dave, that's option 2. So one of the things I proposed in option 2 was eliminating as much as we can. And then if we end up with, we like these 3 and here's how we ranked them, or this was our preference based on the giant question marks we have about, you know, encroachment onto the right of way, or, you know, utilities or whatever. I put that more as an option 2 sort of category. That's where I was going with that, just to be clear.
So option 2 would be that we actually do make a recommendation if we can come up with one without suspending until November. Sorry, Dave.
Yeah, okay. Basically that was it. I mean, the full deliberations is that we'd have to go through and argue each one, right? But if we more or less can say, well, look, we've eliminated these, and then we've got of the remaining ones here, what we see, you know, if we can rank them, great. But the part that I'm concerned is going to hold us up. The reason I'm not expecting we're going to get every answer from anybody. But I think there's enough of what Caltrain has already sent us. I mean, remember the email that Caltrain sent us says that we still have to think about 4 tracks at Churchill. We don't necessarily agree with that.
I have to interrupt. I don't understand what your distinction is between 2 and 3 then. It seems to me you're changing what you had to say in 2.
No, my thing for
Because
2.
I think under 3, we have always, which is our status quo, I point out again, we have always said there's a variety of ways we can reach a decision. As Dave said, we could very well say we prefer A to B, but if $1 billion falls into our hands, then B is better than A. That to me is a perfectly reasonable recommendation. But as I see it, the path we're on is to have a series of recommendations, reasons for the recommendations, so that anybody can read them and say that this group is recommending A over B for the following reasons, and with maybe some concerns as to whether A is really feasible or whatever. I'm picking up on what Greg said, because I think he's absolutely right that we need to know what level of specificity we're talking about, and I think we've gone overboard on that. But if your number 2 is very close to that, then it seems to me that you're really saying 3. But what I was hearing from number 2, and maybe I need to go back and reread it, but maybe you do too, is that you'd be avoiding some of the decision making. I think that we owe it to the community to say what we think about all of these alternatives and go thumbs up or thumbs down with maybe some caveats.
I'm not trying to avoid any decisions. What I'm saying is, I don't think there's going to be bits of significant information that's going to be missing. We're not going to get answers about whether the encroachment is allowed or not allowed. And without knowing where each.
We were always going to have that problem. I don't think, as Greg, I think, has accurately pointed out, this is not, we're talking about preferred. Let's emphasize the word preferred for a moment.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to have those answers this year.
Right.
Or next year either, for that matter.
I would agree. But the second piece that I think is significant is that this entire time, this process was architected based on the idea that there are very generic grade separations we have to do: a trench, a tunnel, a viaduct, and we need to have a preference. And I think what's come out of that is the new alternatives. And both the 2 new alternatives, I'm going to call them 2, but the South Palo Alto and the North Palo Alto alternatives have a level of bike and pedestrian things that are necessary to be able to understand whether it succeeds or it doesn't. And it is why the staff is saying, hey, we're having to go deeper on this alternative than the other 2. Well, yes, but that's required because the comprehensive plan also says that we treat bikes and pedestrians and cars equal. So in order to give those 2 new alternatives the same level of analysis and prove that it works, you can't just prove that you can engineer the tracks and leave out the part.
You can still make a decision as to what our recommendations are, Nadia.
Right, but you're not, I don't think that, Larry, I think where we disagree is we're not getting the input from the proper committees. You would have payback.
I guess we differ, Nadia. I think we do. There's a limit. You have a decision point where you say, we've got enough information to make our decisions. It's always going to be less than 100%.
Of course, but I just feel like from my perspective, I don't think that the bike and the pedestrian things have been fleshed out sufficiently for me to be able to go to city council or the community and say, look, for the new alternatives, I considered a person walking and biking the same way I considered a car, because I just don't think we have. And that was, by the way, the same problem we had with the closure the entire time, is that the biggest complaint was, how are the mitigations really working for bikes and peds? It's part of what, the folks in North Palo Alto have been saying. So that's my take, but happy to put it to a vote. But we do have members of, do we have any members of the public who want to speak on this? Because if you do, now would be.
Hey, I'm not done yet.
Oh, sure. Sorry, but go ahead, Dave.
I'm going to take the floor back to under my feet, which got swept out here. So just to finish off, the other big elephant in the room to me is the Caltrain right away. And so that's another big open question that could kill anything like instantly. And so that, along with things like funding sources, could mean, like I said, uncertainty in whatever we vote on, right? And we just have to acknowledge it. And then just to add on to you and Larry's discussion here, I think it's going to take till December, November to do even just that, like to get to preferred plus caveats kind of thing. It's just not, I don't think we're going to get anywhere with option 2, a little shorter timeline. Thank you.
Okay, Keith?
I guess I'm still not clear on the next step. My understanding is that we were going to be giving a recommendation, and that recommendation would be for council to spend more money doing a deeper dive on that recommended alternative. And if that's the case, I would not support spending more money because, again, we're ahead of Caltrain. If the purpose is that we're going to have a decision and we're going to say we like this, but we have some concerns, this would be another option if those concerns came up. I have no problem making a decision that way. But if the decision is going to kick off more money, I think we'd be throwing money down the drain potentially.
Okay. Phil, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think what Keith just said is very wise. So I'm thinking, if we're gonna vote, or if you pinned me to the wall and said, Phil, you got to choose, I would choose option 3 as long as you give ourselves permission that we might have to document the pros and cons of our decision carefully, and possibly for one decision suggest an alternate or backup.
Okay.
But I think, the more I listen to the discussions, particularly what some people have said about you got to finish what you start, the more I think we've just got to drive to completion. Well, whatever completion means may not be, as I forgot who said this, is the citizens expect us to design everything down to the last curb cut. I don't think it's feasible now. We had another year, unless we're going to unless the XCAP is going to exist through the end of final design. I don't think that's our intention.
So
Sorry, I'm going to start. I know I jumped in on Dave. I feel like if we're not going to get to that level of design, and in fact, it would not be appropriate. So, for instance, if we were to say, our preferred alternative is the hybrid option. I'm just picking one, not for any particular reason. The exact design, how are the walls designed? Where do the trees go? How wide is it? I don't think that we should actually be the ones. I think like a long time ago, someone used the word design charrette, and I think Tony was upset because he actually knows what a design charrette is. I would want a group of people who live near the thing we're going to build to actually then engage with the engineers on decisions like that, being that the council has voted that we're going to build a hybrid, and people who live near the thing are the ones who should make those final decisions, not us. So at some point we do need to stop and say, as an XCAP, this is what we think is feasible for all of Palo Alto, and now the people who are most directly impacted by the actual construction need to have a say in what happens.
Okay, so responding to what I'm hearing, it sounds like we're leaning towards option 3, or the majority of the people are leaning towards option 3. But so the next thing I want to consider is Larry's idea to not wait for the town halls, and so maybe we can take the option 3 schedule and basically shove it back to the end of July, which would mean we'd work through July, August, and September, and maybe try to push towards something for October. And again, so now I'm looking for a check-in on how does that work with people's actual lives and your commitment to be able to write in the next 2 months.
I'm good with that.
Okay. Anybody want to say anything about that or
Yeah,
have thoughts? Or
Well, Adina and I are supposed to do the Caltrain write-up. I've done something, but Adina has not been at the last few meetings. At least she's not here now. I shouldn't speak about the past. So I can't speak for her.
Okay.
Also, given that we have had some attrition, some people might find they're going to be writing the solo. That's the best we're going to be able to do. I'm nervous about working ahead of the town halls only because we might find there's strong opposition. Now, the thing that haven't been clear about in a while is to what extent does the city council want us to take community input or community feedback as a consideration for our decisions? Because I've heard we should, I've heard we shouldn't. What?
I think that's up to us.
All right, okay.
Larry?
Well, I just wanted to hear from staff as to whether their timetable could be improved. I would still like us to have the town hall. just so that everybody can feel that who wants to be heard is heard. But the schedule of time, the town hall keeps slipping and slipping and slipping. And to me, it's become, it slipped too far, but maybe the city staff can reverse that. So I'd like to hear from Phil.
Yeah, so I understand your concern. I just want to go back to the earlier question. I just want to mention, I do agree with Nadia. I think it is up to the XCAP, but I just want to mention that the council gave the XCAP specific criteria to consider for the grade separations, and community feedback was not one of them. But that said, the town halls, I think it's going to be very hard for us to get those online sooner than August. I think, in fact, probably impossible. I know we have our consultants here, but I think that's very, very unlikely. And that said, our chief communications officer really wants them to occur at the same time as the start of school, to ensure that we have people in town, and that people who have left town just before school, when they think they actually get a chance to take a break, that we're not missing them. So that was our chief communications officer's input to this process. And frankly, I'm not sure. We have a meeting next week to work on developing the website and the virtual town halls setup and all of that. So I don't know from a development and creation standpoint if we could get it up any sooner, but I will share that input with our group next week, that there is a push from XCAP to have them go online sooner.
Well, I think when we get into the discussion about the fact sheets and what have you, I have a lot of reservations about not being able to go any further on the bike pedestrian stuff for budget reasons, but then also putting those out to the public and the kind of reaction that we might get from the community. I have to say that that's something that I'm concerned about. Yeah, Tony?
Nadia, I agree with you. I think we cannot put what we have right now into a town hall meeting. I think it's severely deficient in bike and ped, especially ped. I think bike, we have some amount of caring, but for instance, we have on Meadow or Charleston a bike path and a pedestrian path, and now we're going to reduce the pedestrian path. And there's very few people speaking for pedestrians, but I think it's so severely deficient that I think we're going to get ripped apart at a town hall meeting. So I think we're far from getting it done. We're not there yet. Maybe with some work we can get there, but I doubt it. I think it's going to take until November, October, November.
If we don't move the town hall meeting, it looks on the schedule 3 that our plan was to not have any XCAP meetings the week of the town hall meeting, because we don't want to be deliberating the same weeks as the town hall meeting. But, different factions of the public show up at different times and places depending on what they think is going to happen. Is it really so bad if we do some deliberating the same weeks as the town hall meeting and reserve the right to, if we hear something completely new we've never heard before, take that into consideration? I'm not saying that would be ignoring the public's input, but that would be starting some deliberations in parallel with these town hall meetings.
Yeah, I mean,
I want to interject that most of the people I've been talking to, whatever age groups, are not planning on taking any trips out of town for obvious reasons, July and August. So this usual concern that lots of the school age parents are not going to be in town, I really wonder that's true in this particular year.
actually, I know lots of people who've decided to rent a place and still quarantine, but in a different location. That's just my experience. But it's about everybody's reality. Well, so anybody else have any strong thoughts about the town halls and how that interacts with our meetings? Because that's basically what'll decide the schedule, right?
So Nadia, what I like to add something, that we are not going to have too much details on all these plans to a further levels because those are part of, like others have said, that they will be part of the design phases. And at conceptual levels, when you're looking at 100 to 100 scale drawings, you can't get the level of details that a lot of the members of the public as well as others are desiring. At this level, it's going to be a higher level decision on the type of alternate that much suits the community and that addresses majority of our concerns. And then we refine those as part of the design and future phases of environmental and design. So I understand that most of you have that in your background and understand that concept, but just I wanted to reiterate that the conceptuals are going to remain conceptuals, and we can define a little bit, but it's not going to be to the level of the detail of the design. The radius curves and all that's not going to be shown on those plans because that goes into the design phases.
Yes, thank you, Ripon. I mean, I understand that, and I'm with Greg that we're doing very high level conceptual design. I think the concern that I have is that the new alternatives came about out of the concerns of the existing alternatives. And in order for people to understand the why, they need to understand levels of at least basic circulation for the bikes and beds that I just don't think we necessarily have. But I appreciate that that's not the level of design that we would go to typically. But I think in some ways negatively impacts specifically the new alternatives in a way that it doesn't for the existing alternatives. If that makes sense.
Phil, I want to interject one last question on the town halls. Can we have your commitment that the town hall will take place in the second half of August?
I don't know that I can provide that commitment today, but that is our plan. I think, I don't know if we have the right staff from AECOM to tell us whether that's realistic right now, but I do believe we should be able to get it up by, I think our target was August 15th. So I don't see any issues with doing that at this point. Yes, to answer your question, I don't see anything that should hold us up from doing that.
Thank you. Keith, I see that your hand has been up. I'm sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, I am very concerned that if we present what we have right now to the town hall, it'll be counterproductive. I mean, we understand in the committee that we're looking at the high level and these are some flaws and they can be fixed. But when you present something like that with the obvious flaws to the city, we are going to get back, it's going to backfire. We're going to get a backlash of people not understanding that they can be fixed, and we will hurt our credibility and hurt the final decision.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from ex-cappers before I let the public chime in? Okay, looks like we've got 3 folks with their hands up. So I'll we'll each have 2 minutes, and I'll turn it over to my timer.
Okay, so the first public speaker is Elizabeth Alexis. Please feel free to unmute yourself and you can talk now.
Okay, hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I think I want to step back, and Nadia and I have a little bit of a different background than maybe some of you. We've spent literally the last 11 years looking at the issues with how transportation plan projects are planned in the United States. I've testified in Congress. I've testified multiple times at the state Senate level. And we have a crisis in the United States that we design poor projects that are bad for bike and ped, and projects that cost just way too much. And I think watching this process, the linear nature of what we're insisting on, which seems like the logical thing to do, you can see how this happens. I mean, we are rushing to a specific direction before incredibly important, fundamental requirements are understood or discussed or whatever, with especially Caltrain, on the construction management, which makes one alternative would be great, depending on what they do, and in another world, it would be terrible. Looking at utilities, which we've talked about a little bit about, but I can tell you on projects throughout the country that people commit to a specific alternative with sort of a generic utility relocation budget, and then find out it's a nightmare, but they're so far down, they don't want to back out, and they just have to sort of make it work. So, I mean, we're looking at also this thing where we take the traffic engineer as, and I like you, but it's like sort of the numbers are God, and we just work with those instead of trying to think about what is driving traffic and if we want to do something differently, how much traffic can we have coming into it, and thinking in a bigger picture, you know, taking standards and just, you know, they all have knock-on effects, and we say, oh, it's just 10%, but it's not just 10%. It's not like you think of that as being some lens and you're just getting more and more focused, but that's not it at all. And, you
Thank
know,
you.
it often as you
You're out
change
of
these
time.
details, you know, the whole thing changes. I mean, I'm really concerned about the process here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Eduardo Lack. Please unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Yes, thank you. I'm assuming that this is, we need to talk about items that you could just have been discussing, and then that we would discuss in Churchill Meadow and Charleston later. So I would like to urge you to please do an item number 3, which is to come to a recommendation. You are 100 times more knowledgeable than the city council, and a significant amount of time and expertise has gone into it. So I'm glad that you seem to be leaning towards doing that. I also would like you to try to understand the impact that the decisions that you're making are having to the people on those streets. As a metaphor, you know, in a bacon and egg breakfast, the chicken is involved and the pig is committed. So those people who live in Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston are committed. We are going to be living with the decisions that you are making. And those decisions will affect us, you know, affect our safety, affect how, you know, our life is lived, affect, you know, what's going on in front of our houses and in front of our driveways and our streets, et cetera. And the faster that you make a decision and the faster the city council can move forward, the faster we can make decisions as to what's going to happen with our lives and, you know, our households and our homes. So I really appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to do that. And then I'll make my comments on Churchill Meadow and Charleston on item number 4. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Penny. Please unmute yourself and you can talk now.
There we go. Sorry about that. It took me a minute. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you. So I have a couple of comments just from listening to the discussion. I think that uncertainty around the Caltrain process should be, to my mind, a paramount concern. I heard what Larry Klein said, and I respect what he said about finishing what you start, but also you know, not missing the opportunity for federal dollars becoming available. It seems to me it's not like we're not going to have a shovel-ready project anyway until that Caltrain process is complete. So those don't seem to me like arguments that are persuasive. I also am very concerned, having sat through the payback meeting. It was the very first time payback had been presented with these concepts. And I have to say that there was a lot of concern in the room about the extent to which it was difficult to even evaluate whether or not bike pedestrian facilities in these concepts would work. Now, mind you, this is a large group of people who are very used to looking at conceptual plans. They know how to do this. And they expressed, many of them to you, that they were frustrated with the level of detail that was not available in these concepts. As far as I know, the City School Traffic Safety Committee has never seen these most recent plans. And I think that's important, particularly, I looked at the Churchill plans today, and what immediately leapt out to me was why Kellogg and not Seal, which is already a school commute route that directly connects to Hayes and Green Middle School's attendance boundary areas on the west side of the tracks.
Thank you, Penny.
Thank you.
Yeah, our next speaker is Susan Newman. Please unmute and you can begin talking now.
Hi there. I just have a brief comment. I was a little confused by Nadia's summary that people are leaning toward 3, because I thought what I heard was kind of a convergence on the combination of 2 and 3, or a new understanding of 2 or something like that, with room for multiple, perhaps ranked recommendations. And I just so much like the list of things that was in item 2 or option 2. I think those should be included no matter what you're doing in the report. And to the extent that you want to include some of the guidance for the city's negotiations with Caltrain, you want to lay out the pros and cons, and you want to point out contradictions in the city's criteria for this project. I just want to encourage everybody to get very specific about what that means, and maybe get some input from those of us who have been following closely, or the community at large. And I wanted to say also that I do understand Greg's point about accepting the need to operate at a certain level of abstraction. But I will say that for the community, the devil is in the details, and maybe that doesn't matter for what you're trying to do here. But I do agree with Nadia that figuring out how the bike ped flows are going to work for the new options is really important, because a very big motivation for these options, one very big motivation is supposedly improved safety for these modes of transportation. And then I would also say that for some of the others, the viaduct and hybrid are foremost on my mind at the moment. It would be really good to lay out what could be done to improve bike and pedestrian safety with those options if we decide to go through with them as a city. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rachel Kellerman. Please unmute yourself and you can talk now.
Hi, thank you. Hello, everyone. My husband and I, of course, really honor your time commitment, and especially listening to how you're ready to tackle writing and do all this in the summer. It's really admirable, and we appreciate that. We have been following along with you on Zoom and in person for a couple years. We did a write to you, and we hope that you consider what we have to say when you decide how your the format of your final project. One thing I want to point out is the importance of community engagement. We have been trying to engage the north part of our area for a couple years. The closure of Churchill will bring great volumes of traffic to our area, and we are not at all pleased with the mitigation plan, as you all know, especially for the bike and pedestrians, which we have to look at this holistically, and that has not been done. And so going without any sort of community engagement seems like your recommendations would be out of context. And also, it seems like the council will want to have a recommendation that the community will get behind, especially if it will require some output of money from the community. And the context is incredibly important, as Carrie points out. We're in a pandemic. No one has ever experienced this kind of trauma, economic, otherwise. And you do have people tuning into Zoom, and maybe we'll go to the town halls, but you're not going to get new people to tune in. And that's what everybody is going to really need to find a comprehensive plan for rail crossings. So unfortunately for everybody, the context has really changed since you got your charge from the council. And I hope you will consider that when you decide what your final report will be. Once again, I really honor your time commitment, and thank you for everything you've done so far.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Drew. Please unmute yourself and you can begin talking now.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. So listening to the discussion, it's great to hear. My point, I think, in general, I've been watching this grade set projects on Caltrain in multiple cities. I've been involved in Hillsdale, where it got completely forgot about the south. They moved the station north, and they completely forgot about the south side access for bike peds. And I think one of the biggest general themes, and I think that this is what I'm trying to bring up, is leaving the XCAP is one step along the way. There's multiple steps in a project, and this is one of them. And leaving, you don't have to solve everything, and leaving some hooks and some like, hey, we're down to these 2 recommendations in this case, or we're down to this, and here's the issues that weren't resolved, or we think there should be more bike undercrossings at certain streets. That helps the next step because something was left for them to point to that, hey, the previous people reached this and they found this needs further studied. When those kind of hooks and seeds haven't been planted along the way, it makes the next step much harder because there's nothing there. And then the people in the meeting in power say, well, see, the first people didn't identify that as a problem, so we don't need to identify it. It doesn't mean XCAP can't narrow a lot of things down. I think you've done a lot of work, but I think you also can achieve a lot of great results by leaving some seeds, some future things that still need to be worked through, and those being highlighted will help the next steps. And thank you.
Thank you. That concludes public comments for agenda item number 3.
Great, thanks. Okay, so XCappers, if we're leaning towards a combination of option 2 and option 3, I just want to note from my personal schedule is that, as some of you know, my house is still being remodeled, and fingers crossed, I hopefully will be moving back into my house sometime the first week of August. But that means that the last week of July and the first week of August are probably going to be terrible times for me to attempt to have a Zoom meeting for me personally. But you know, and I'm sensitive to say you guys can start without me because at this point that would be deliberations. So not sure what to do about that part of it, but just wanted to make you guys aware. Larry can obviously go from there, but I don't want to miss out on 2 out of 3 key meeting dates if we're starting a new set of deliberations on a particular alternative. So I just wanted to point that out. Yeah, Phil.
Nadia, as anybody who has gone through a home remodel of any scale will tell you, that date is subject to change. Ask Tony maybe, but or you could ask anybody on this group.
Yeah,
and
original
it
date
never gets improved on.
Yeah, my original date was May 1st. So I will give a free hot tip to anybody here, which is if there's a worldwide potential pandemic anywhere, don't start a remodel. That's like my free hot tip that you get for watching this XCAP meeting. But
I'm
anyway,
currently on week 6 of my 1.5 week roof installation.
Oh,
yeah. That was supposed to start in March. So
I'm feeling super inspired. Thanks, guys. So, okay, well, I don't know that we necessarily need to take formal action. What I can do is come back at the next meeting with an updated timeline, and we can just have it be as informational, and we'll have to be flexible. And you know what I also heard is we'll have to look at potentially doing some doodle polls going forward in terms of time as we get closer to August 15th, which is when school starts, and seeing how that works for Dave and works for Carrie and works for everybody else. Does that sound good? Or does anybody object to that? It's okay. All right, I'm getting thumbs up. So with that, we will move to item number 4, which is the updated matrix discussion and the updated fact sheets. So do we have folks? Oh yeah, I see we've got the AECOM folks here, so I'll turn it over to them.
Peter and Millet will be leading on the matrix, and you know, so they can help us with that update. Peter or Millet?
Yeah, we had not planned on a formal presentation. I mean, what we had provided for the, we had provided 2 documents, which was the response to comments based on the last XCAP meeting that we attended, and comments that we received on the fact sheets, as well as the layouts and the renderings. So we wanted to note for you our responses to those comments so that you could understand the items that we would be incorporating and ones that we would be deferring to the next phase of study. So I would open it up to any comments maybe on that first. And then the other item that we had this evening was for us to go through, you know, the matrix is what you've seen previously with some updates, and then we have added the new ideas to the matrix.
So yeah, what we would request XCAP to do is make any proposed changes, or look at the colors also to make sure that we are in the right areas and that there is any concerns or comments that we need to incorporate in these updates. So we can bring that back as in our next meeting.
You're muted, Nadia. You're saying anything?
Sorry, thank you. Millette, what I was asking was, what I'm hearing you say is we first would go through the response to comments and then go through the matrix. That's the order that you'd prefer?
That's what I'm proposing. We could do either, whatever you prefer.
Great. I saw Dave virtually raise his hand.
Oh, I had no comments on the
Oh.
responses, but I do have on the matrix, so I'll wait.
Okay, if XCappers can put their hands up if you have anything to say to the response to comments from XCap. I'll give everybody a minute. This is the Excel spreadsheet that has written responses. Does anybody have anything? Am I the only one who has stuff? Please, somebody else have something. Okay, so it looks like I don't see any other hands up. My biggest question is, there's a lot of spots where it says that the refinements will be made at the next phase of the project, especially at the bike connections. And I guess if the town hall meetings are going forward, I'd really want to see what that looks like and how that verbiage is kind of called out, because I think that that's, even though it's something that this committee, because we've been doing this for 2 years, we understand, as Greg said, we're just working at a super high level. I remain really concerned about how this is going to be received by the community, and obviously being sensitive to the fact that there's also property impacts. And so was wondering, I guess we'll wait to see when you bring those back, but that at a high level is my concern. The other one is that on page 2, where it talks about, let's see, page 2, 1, 2, 3, the fourth one where it says, or the third one, sorry, where it talks about Carlson Court and not showing anything going down to Carlson Court. I appreciate that that the bike ped connection from AECOM's perspective is part of a bike safety connectivity study and not part of the grade separation study, but keeping in mind that this is supposed to kind of plug into our network. We did talk about previously, and I didn't see it in the list of comments, about having the Safe Routes to Schools map overlap with the maps that we're using on these things to show those integrated. And I just was wondering if we have any updates from either staff or the AECOM team about how those will be incorporated in the town hall documents.
Yeah, I'll take a look and see if I can get Safe Routes to address that.
Okay.
Answer your question. I guess to answer your other question, which is really about, how, realistically there could be more than just Carlson Court. That I think, we got some public comment today that actually, there's a coordination between more than just some of these, I think a lot of the nearby streets and corridors that should play into these networks that would be looked at outside of the actual grade separation project, but I don't think should necessarily be a completely separated process. So I think that actually should play into our ped and bicycle plan update, is consideration of recommended alternatives or potential recommended alternatives.
Yeah, so something that signals that officially, so that when this goes out to a town hall, people are understanding that hasn't been lost, I think is super critical. And so however you figure out how to do that.
That's a great point. We'll work on the language on that.
And then on a similar note, I'm wondering if we should, I know we've been calling them fact sheets the whole time, but without going into the colors and whatnot, I do think that there's some subjective elements. I'm wondering if we should just call them overview sheets, because there's some things on there that are not factual, is just sort of a best overview of them. And I think that will help, because I think when people see facts, they assume that what's written on there is, exactly what's going on. And, arguably there's a lot of things that are going to depend on, what the ground conditions are and what the actual engineering conditions are. So, and then let me see if I have any others. I think that's it.
Nadia?
Yes.
Yeah, so I would like to comment on one of the response items. Let me just switch to that response. I'm gonna have to switch my system to look at that. Just give me a second, please.
Sure.
It's the one entitled the U-turn movement at Alma Plaza. So I spent a little more time looking at that, not to the level of detail certainly that AECOM did, but what they've written seems intuitively correct. That is, it would be confined to automobiles only. So I'm inclined to sort of accept that as a reasonable response. Doesn't mean we can't ask for it. It just means we have to understand that it's going to be confined to automobiles only.
Okay. Tony?
Okay.
So there's a lot of valuable information in the comments from residents. And I think there's stuff that we can categorize into this evaluation criteria that we have. But I think what we've learned is about council's evaluation criteria can be, I mean, the statements can be modified somewhat, and what we've learned from these criteria as we've gone along can be elaborated on and maybe corrected in some cases. In the second point on these criteria is I think it would be interesting and valuable for the community and for XCAP to look at how we would rank them against each other, so that
Tony, you're talking. I think you're talking about the matrix.
yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
We're not there yet. We're talking about this one.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry.
Yep. No worries. I was getting confused with. I wasn't sure whether it was ranking. So I just want to be super clear. I'll come back to you though. Does anybody else have anything on the responses from XCAP? I mean, responses for XCAP.
Nadia, I wanted to raise the question that Penny Elson asked, which is an explanation of why at Churchill, the bike ped crossing would be at Kellogg and not at Seal. There a short explanation for that?
So do you want to take that one, or I could take it? That was initially proposed by the two mics, and that have a lot of benefits versus it being at Churchill. There has been some discussion at Seal, but it was just chosen to show at Kellogg. I think the city is open to the idea of also having or maybe moving that crossing to Seal. But I think I remember vaguely Ed saying there were some issues at Seal. I don't recall off the top of my head what those were.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I couldn't get my thing to unmute for some reason, but yeah, I don't recall what the issues were, but I think ultimately we are open to Seal or Kellogg, but also I think that, as Nadia mentioned, that's potentially something that the bike and ped plan could look at in collaboration with this, because I don't necessarily think that it has to be one or the other. It could potentially be both, but I think for purposes of this project, we're trying to find a crossing to accommodate the loss of the crossing there at Churchill.
So just to clarify, the Seal conversation actually dates back more than 2 years. It was actually originally reviewed. It was removed by a single council member when there used to be a rail committee. And I will just note, I think that council member may be conflicted because they live on that street. So it was something that was discussed. It's actually something that is also in the rail corridor study that Tony and others participated on in 2014. I forget what year it was. Tony, I don't know if you remember your rail corridor study that looked at good places to cross.
I don't remember.
Yeah, and so I think it's important that that not get lost. I mean, it's not on any of the documents, and I will say that the obvious benefit of Seal is that it would come up on the Pierce Park side, so you wouldn't have the issues that have been raised by the bicyclists of having those 90-degree sharp turns, and you don't have the problem of encroaching on the bike path and the Palo bike path back there. And I believe, Keith, you and I have discussed this. Bike pedestrian improvements to a park does not have any impacts. It doesn't require the undedication of parkland, correct? That's considered a viable.
Your bike ped access is considered a park use.
Right. So I think early on there was some concern of whether we'd have to undedicate some portion of the park, and Keith confirmed that that's actually not necessary because it's seen as a bike improvement. So I guess the question back is, or the comment back is, how do we include that as one of the options for the partial underpass? And recognizing that that is work that is unfunded and not scoped.
Well, let me follow up then, since one of the respondents, it's either Philip or Peter, I can't remember, they said that this was really part of the design by the two Mikes. Does anybody know their thinking in choosing Kellogg over Seal? Was it Nadia suggested, or was it something else?
I think the two Mike's original proposal was actually to have the bike ped crossing at Churchill. They had that.
No, I know that, but somebody said Kellogg, and I think it was Peter.
AECOM.
Yeah, there's advantages to having a Kellogg because they're going underneath Alma. The other one you had to cross the Fed's bikes had to cross the northbound lanes on Alma, and then there would be a bridge over the southbound lanes. So Kellogg made a lot of sense in that regard. It also makes sense in the sense of while construction is going on at Churchill, you could have the ped bike facility at Kellogg built in an early phase.
That's true.
Again,
Seal,
I'm sorry, say again?
that is true of Seal as well.
I would think so.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I don't think Seal was ever dismissed as not being a possibility. So, maybe in the recommendation, you could say that you guys recommend that Seal be investigated also as an option.
And
I think Larry was asking a specific question, which was how did we get from what the Mikes proposed to the option at Kellogg? And if I'm hearing you correctly, Peter, it was just something that you guys proposed because it was the next closest one physically to Churchill, and seemed to make sense, but Seal is still possible.
I think they proposed it for those reasons I just mentioned. You didn't have the at-grade crossing with Alma, and it provided an ability to construct that as an initial phase. I kind of wish they were on the line. Those are the two main benefits. So they probably chose it for those reasons, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Especially the separation with Alma. That's the part that really made a lot of sense.
And I'm so sorry, but I don't remember there were some apprehensions with Seal that did come up, and I'm sorry to say that I can't remember offhand what they were, but I think that a simple response to this is that could be provided as an optional alternate. I think what we've got is a list of fact sheet or a list of kind of facts and responses, the response to the comments, and I feel like this is the kind of thing that could be provided in our town halls as as a possible alternate. The bike ped crossing could be provided at Seal, and similarly, it's something that could be looked at regardless of this project as part of the bike and ped plan. So yeah, just want to throw that out there, and I think it should be part of the future bike ped plan.
Greg, and then Tony.
Sorry, but sorry, I'm slow in the uptake. I didn't realize we're talking about Seal all the way down by Pierce Park, right? I mean, that's 4 blocks from Churchill. I mean, if we're worried about the safety of kids riding their bikes to Palo, it seems pretty unlikely that they're going to go all the way around to Seal if that's the only way for them to cross Alma between Embarcadero and Oregon. That's a really long way to go.
It's actually so on the east side of the track, Seal is actually the preferred safe routes for all the kids traveling down to Walter Hayes. So on the east side, that's what works. On the west side, Greg, if you're looking at a map, you go through Pierce Park, but Park Boulevard back there is closed. Cars can't go through there. So it actually, if you follow it through Southgate, it actually goes right into the back of Palo. I forget the name of the street. It might be it's not Mariposa. It's the Castellet.
Yeah, no, I'm familiar with that area. I've been there on a bike, but it seems like it's a long, for certain kids on their way to Palo, it's a long detour, and it's going to mean more kids are going to try and cross at Embarcadero. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe the traffic improvements will help there. Kellogg or Seal sounds like the wrong decision. It sounds like more like we should have a crossing at either Kellogg or Churchill and at Seal. I mean, if we're looking for additional infrastructure money to fall from the sky, that seems to me it would have a much greater impact on the town than some other things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tony?
So I think both Seal and Kellogg have problems, but I think Kellogg only because it's so close to Embarcadero that and there's a bike path there, so Seal might be a little bit better. But the problem I have with both these alternatives is that the existing street has a bike lane and a pedestrian sidewalk, and we're planning only for bike lane. Now, if you add a pedestrian sidewalk, we're using 8%, which is the ADA max. It's like comparing a 2% grade to Caltrain, and we're not using 2%. I don't see why we should be using 8%. 4% is at the borderline of comfortable for old people, for disabled. I know the ADA says that's the max, but just like we don't go to 2% with Caltrain, we should not go to the 2%. It's uncomfortable for the old, and we need to care for that population as well. And I don't see this crossing viable, this pedestrian crossing viable at 8% in either case.
Peter, can you confirm if it's 5% or 8%? I thought it was 5.
Yeah, we laid the ped bike ramps out at 8% with 5-foot landings. That averages out to about a 7% grade, but you know, those could be laid out at 5%. And you're talking about just a slightly longer length of ramp. It shouldn't make a difference really in the decision on the alternative.
Okay.
We should lay it out at less than 5. If we can get it to 4. You know, as you get older, you guys will realize it, hopefully. Your ankles don't change, and the angle of your ankle and the stress on your ankle is huge with the slope.
Yeah, just the other. Yeah, Tony, understood. The other thing I wanted to state, you had mentioned you compared it to a 2% for the Caltrain rail grade. I think that's what you were trying to compare it to, and I think that's completely apples and oranges there, because a 2% grade for the rail is required design exception. What we laid out for the ped bike ramps would not require any design exceptions. But your point well taken, you know, the flatter grades are better for, you know, older people or what have you.
Well, so I just want to remind everyone that what the comments are saying is that it's nice that we have all these thoughts on the bike details, but none of that's going to be included in any of the drawings. so we can put in these comments, but I want to be clear that this will not be what is shown, and this will not really be, there's not money to update or change any of these things. So I just wanted to make sure everyone understands that. Phil?
Well, I think it was Drew who said that we had to leave some seed and hooks in our report, and I think these points are very good examples of that. That is for the people who come after us to work on this decision. So we're not going to, I don't think we should ignore this. I think we need to capture it all very carefully, but I don't think we can push out the timelines to address all these issues.
Yeah.
In terms of our scope.
I appreciate that. I just hope that people don't get outraged and this becomes unproductive as a result.
Well, you know, specifically with the issue of the town halls, we're going to have to very carefully, prominently tell people that at this stage of the design, we normally don't have a final design, and it's just not realistic to have a final design for people to view, and there'll be plenty of opportunities for community engagement as the design moves closer to final. That's the best we can do.
All right, if there's not any more comments on that, we can move to the matrices, which I know, I think Dave, you had your hand up first before for that. So I'll start with you, and then any ex-cappers, if you have matrix comments, please digitally raise your hand so I can call you in order. Dave, go for it.
Cool. First, thanks for putting this together. This is quite a lot of work, and also a little bit confusing too. So I guess 2 overall comments. First one is related to the one I made earlier. I'm wondering if there's a way to take out things that we don't know much about. And 2 that pop out to me are Caltrain right-of-way, which is stuck in F right now. There seem to be comments in some of the other options about that. And funding sources. where's that? E, or at least annotate that these are huge unknowns, because if at one level we could say, if we get some clarity and boom, there's say no Caltrain right away allowed at all, everything turns red that even has the word Caltrain mentioned in F. So, but say on the other side of things, there are non-Caltrain right away that we need to talk about too, which are significant too. So those are the two that stood out: the funding sources, local versus otherwise, and then Caltrain right away versus the other types of right away. The next comment is sort of an overall comment about the coloring, because I find that the scale has no middle. Like, you either have to pick a little bit good or a little bit bad. And what it seems like a couple of these could be like, I don't know, gray, which I would call no change, right? If you call dark blue super improvement, like maximum improvement, and then red to be maximum bad, then potentially there's like the status quo right in the middle. And there doesn't seem to be one that kind of doesn't, really change much overall, but yet some of these boxes to me seem to speak to maybe there really isn't a difference between the new and the old.
Did you have a specific box in mind, Dave?
Yeah, there's like in engineering challenges, let's see here. I marked, like, say in the viaduct, it said no significant creek or drainage impacts. Like, wouldn't that be just gray? Wouldn't it just be pretty much the same as before, because it's going over all of them and we didn't really do much damage or anything to them, and we didn't really improve the situation either, I don't think either. No major utility relocations. Maybe that there's a hint of there, because maybe there's some minor utility relocations. I'm not sure if those qualifiers, like no significant creek or drainage impacts versus definite no, without this word significant, is the reason why they're the light orange versus potentially like a no change. But I guess the absence of a middle kind of gives the nuance that potentially could be good or bad. And maybe angling, if you pick the orange for whatever reason, that the guy who did it, then that would be a negative. So if you can see, like down here in engineering challenges, nothing ever improves, which is kind of interesting. And I was kind of go back to, like, is there really no improvement anywhere in engineering on any of these things? And so it kind of gives a weird flavoring for the colors picked. And then you're trying to resolve that with the other parts of the matrix that do have dark blues and the improvement side of things. So it'd be, the only solution I could come up with is either maybe combine light blue and light orange and turn it into like a gray, or stick a gray in between the two, to acknowledge that, it's still going to be the same. It's probably going to be about the same. Not really great, not improving, and not really detracting either. Then I had some specifics.
Could I comment on a couple of those before you move on?
Yeah, go ahead. Thanks.
I mean, I do want to say on the engineering challenges sheet, I mean, those are impacts, right? So there's really none of those. That's why we've chosen to highlight those in all of the orange to red colors, because it's not something, it's a challenge, right? It's a problem you didn't have before, that's an impact we're having to solve that isn't in the existing condition. So you add it on for the engineering challenges, you won't see any blue, right? That's just the nature of the assessment that we're making there. I also wanted to comment, you made some comment about the funding. I think the funding comments are just in the response or the level of the order of magnitude of the cost. So you'll see things like, so the least expensive one has the lowest, which row was that?
Are you talking about closure and Churchill being blue?
Here it goes, like F and financing. So that was kind of the, what's realistic to be funded. Obviously, the largest costs when you're getting into, you know, the $1 billion, those are significant and they're, you know, harder to fund and more challenging. So that's kind of the wording we used, was just generally just to address the variation in cost among the alternatives. And then I think on your comment about right-of-way, we certainly could differentiate the difference between private property and Caltrain right-of-way, if that was something that was important to XCAP.
Well, we don't have a row except for Q that talks about Caltrain, but that specifically says design exceptions, which is not right away, right?
Well, we generally have right-of-way, we'll have F that talks about acquisitions, right? And
Oh yeah, but my comment was about maybe separating that out, because that could be a critical factor that unfortunately we don't know much about, and we may not know by the end of this process.
So Dave, I just want to step back. I think these are the criteria that the city council gave for considerations. I don't know if.
Yeah, but I hear what he's saying, which is that minimized right-of-way acquisition when the council was, I mean, I don't want to speak for the council, but I think that was more about property impacts to homes, not did you encroach on the Caltrain right-of-way, because maybe that was probably not something they even thought about until we developed an alternative that did that. So, I mean, a question about whether we can keep the minimized right-of-way acquisition to be about public, you know, the homes of the public, or you know, public property, the city's property, and then maybe have a Q element of PQR, which would have something dealing with the Caltrain right-of-way. And that might help delineate that in the way that I think, because I don't think that the council was intending to preserve the right-of-way of Caltrain.
Well, I completely agree with that. I want to say the one thing though is note that a right-of-way acquisition would potentially have a financial impact regardless of whether it's Caltrain right-of-way or private right-of-way. So that would be the consideration. But potentially, now this is just a thought, but potentially a solution could be moving Caltrain right-of-way into an engineering challenge. Not sure.
That's what I'm saying. Put it under R, make it an R.
And actually, maybe
we could add it under the exceptions piece.
Yeah, because it really would potentially require Caltrain to say okay. So it is kind of similar.
Yeah, we could certainly do that.
But also based on what you had said, that Caltrain had told us about not giving up any right away right now, basically saying they wouldn't do it. If we didn't take it out of F, a lot of these, anytime you mentioned Caltrain there, that wouldn't they even just turn to red because of the most recent knowledge that we have. So that's why I kind of suggested, well, maybe we should delineate that, because otherwise you could argue that anything any mention in Caltrain in there would turn everything to red, and any of those to red. I have a couple more. Sorry about this. Let's see here. On the underpass for Meadow Charleston, road D, during construction, temporary railroad track required. I'm wondering why that isn't light orange to be consistent with the Churchill Viaduct and also the partial underpass, which has it as orange, because they both are very talked about as similarly.
Dave, can you clarify which row and column again? D and closure?
D and underpass.
Oh, sorry. Meadow and Charleston underpass, road D. The text in that box is very similar to road D of viaduct and partial underpass over at Churchill. And so, but the colors are different.
Should be orange.
And I'm saying maybe the underpass should be light orange there.
I had the same thing marked.
Okay, so just to clarify, that's road D for the underpass, light orange.
For Meadow Charleston, yes.
Yep.
Yep. Let's see, I'm trying to read my notes here. I had a question about underpass C, and there's kind of this text about more circuitous routes and all this stuff. And I'm wondering how we rank, I don't know what you want to call it, confusion of riding or something, or walking, because of the circuitous routes that you have noted. And so if we don't like the confusion or added steps, then wouldn't that not be a dark blue, but at least the, what I would call the medium blue, the blue underneath it?
So I think one thing that's important to do is remind yourselves of the full wording of the criteria. So one that we were talking about just now, which was right of way, looking at, because if you look at the overall fact sheets, it has the more complete wording of what they're looking for. Maybe it doesn't add more. It does say, it does just still say minimize right of way acquisition.
Oh, sorry, yeah. I was in row C. Sorry about that. Did I say that? I don't even remember what I said.
You're talking about, like, so maybe it'd be helpful to call out the row, and I feel like we're
sorry, I might have missed that. So row C, to underpass of Meadow Charleston, it talks about cyclists to have more circuitous routes traveling east and west. And I was just wondering about how to rank the circuitous route comment, which if you would say a straight route or straight shot, nice wide straight ones would be the max improvement. But if there's some alteration from that, then wouldn't it be a little bit less?
Well, but the actual criteria says separate from vehicles, which actually would make that alternative score better than, for example, a hybrid where the bikes and peds stay with the vehicles.
Okay. You're actually getting into something I wanted to talk about, which is a lot of these criteria from the older options are getting kind of dated and old now. And especially if we set some parameters based on the language we use with the new ones, we may need to go back and kind of adjust that. But yeah, hybrid is a dark blue based on what you said. Maybe it should be a medium blue, for example. Okay. In row I of underpass, Meadow Charleston, I'm wondering why it's not a dark orange to be consistent with the partial underpass of Churchill in the same row. Because the language seems very similar.
So you're comparing the underpass at Meadow Charleston to the underpass at Churchill.
That's right. For row I, yep.
I believe part of that is because of the landscaping removal that you have on Meadow Charleston with the planting strips that you do not have on, let's see, because that one's light orange.
Yeah, I think he's asking why it's not medium orange.
Or why aren't they the same, I guess. They seem very similar to me.
Yeah, and this is not an exact science, right? I mean, so that's why we need your feedback on some of these, because they're, you know, they're not all comparing. You're trying to comparative example. The way I would look at it more is because you're going to be making this decision, or, you know, what you prefer at Churchill and what you prefer at Meadow Charleston. So I would recommend that you evaluate the rankings and the coloring related to Meadow Charleston together, and then similarly rank it, look at how the colors compare to Churchill. Because we didn't look back at what did we say at Meadow Charleston. We looked at, for Churchill, what are the differentiators between the closure, the viaduct, and the partial underpass. So you're looking at the color coding, comparing those three against each other, not.
That sounds like a great caveat, Millette, that we might want to put on the documents. Is that the banding of color relates to this overview sheet. I'm going to stop using the word fact sheet. And they're not necessarily the same across, you know, for the north or the south.
Yeah, I mean, you're supposed to be comparatively ranking the 6 alternatives for Meadow Charleston and the 3 for Churchill, right?
Right, but
We're
as
not comparing all 9 against each other.
I think human nature is to root for a favorite, and then if your favorite on one doesn't match the favorite on the other, then you're and you wonder why the colors are different. So I'm just, I know what you're saying, but I think it might be worth calling out for the town halls. Dave, did you have anything else?
Yeah, just
Sorry, I wonder as a follow-up on that, is there value in us separating each of these by crossing to separate fact sheets? Does that make sense?
Well, that's what we did do. That's
no matter
before in the previous versions, we had all the alternatives together, but now we have separated them. So there's just a sheet related to Charleston and then the sheet that's, I mean, they were all in one PDF, but the idea would be that they would be, a front and back or 2 pages for each location.
But I think Philip is saying something different, right? Philip, you're saying we should have one for Meadow and one for Charleston because the configuration at Meadow is different than that of Charleston. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, potentially. And I guess as we go to the town hall, maybe not provide this as one document. I mean, that might be part of the confusion is we've provided this as one document.
Yep.
And maybe separating the documents would allow more for people to consider them separately for each of the crossings.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I agree. That would be our intent for Meadow Charleston and Churchill to be separate documents. I don't think you would want to be comparing all the Meadow versions and all the Charleston versions because they go together, right? So if you're going to do an underpass or you're going to do a hybrid, those 2, Meadow and Charleston, you're doing those together. You're not doing one without the other, right? So you need to evaluate those 2 crossings together.
So question about whether the underpass column maybe could be split in a Meadow underpass and a Charleston underpass to still keep them on the same page, but maybe that would help.
I think that would be inconsistent with the other alternatives, but that's certainly
yeah, but it's 2 different streets and 2 different configurations. I mean, Meadow is different than Charleston, and so for example, on the maintains access for all modes. I'm not sure that on Meadow, where you have much more constrained options of doing all 8 turn movements, is necessarily would be thought of as the same ranking that you might have at Charleston, if that makes sense. Dave, anything else?
Yeah. Yeah, I get everything you're saying about separating and comparing within each other. I just think the nuances aren't clear on why it's light orange, say in my example, and dark orange over here, because the words are exactly the same. That's all. And if you did make it consistent, then you wouldn't have some smart guy like me coming up and asking dumb questions about it. So, but it would seem pretty easy to me, like to unify somewhat. If you can use the same language and you pick the color for it, it should probably be that. Or if it's not, you should write a little bit of text saying, well, this planter thing is, planting strip is more negative for some whatever reason. And that's why you pick that, or it's better in case of this. Otherwise, it just creates more reason to make comments about it as I'm doing now. So I don't know, last call to unify the 2. That would be I think my last unification, at least across the options.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway, so a couple more. Sorry about this. Down the viaduct column in Churchill, row F, it says no acquisition of private properties. I was thinking it'd be dark blue. I mean, I would think that anybody's home not being taken is a significant result for any of these options. There's so much fear about it. I mean, wouldn't that be a great advantage of an option, like an overly great one? And advocate that something like that should be blue, a dark blue, instead of just this light blue, or at least one up to mid blue. You still have one more level between that and the maximum improvement. Should I keep going, or is this, we're going to talk about each one? Nadia?
No, I think whatever you've got. I mean, we've got to get it all out because they have to upgrade these things for the
Okay,
town.
so I'll keep going then, thanks. Row G, a viaduct. Wheel noise will radiate out, which can be mitigated. I'm wondering why that shouldn't be slightly negative, in the sense that it could radiate out. We think it could be mitigated, but it might not be. Potentially over at the partial underpass too, because I'm guessing that's because of the bridge that will be there. There's a lot of the train to go above. I'm wondering why they shouldn't be light orange. Okay, we talked about the engineering part. Then the last comment I had was just simply, I mean, a lot of information has been updated. I mean, even I went to the viaduct when you and I were talking, Nadia, about this hybrid and D. The closure of Churchill has been, it's been renamed to Church Closure plus Add Improvements. And if you can look back at a lot of the minutes, some of them back in May 29th of 2018, I mean, is detailing out some of the things they wanted to look at. And then the alternative on January 22nd of 2019, I mean, they specifically say Churchill and Add Improvements. And so that would, to me, be a good reason to kind of go back and look at some of these things, and to at least acknowledge that things have changed since this chart has been built, and that with the improvements that they would add to the closure, that a lot of these colors are going to change as a result. Because if we take into account the improvements that we spend a lot of time on here at XCAP to go show that they are beneficial, then we should acknowledge them in this chart. Now, I know that opening up this chart has not been a favorite topic for a lot of people, but I think that something needs to happen here, or else we're not really comparing apples to oranges, apples to apples here.
Well, I'd like to hear from other members of the group on this one, because the truth is, this is exactly the kind of stuff that is why I thought this is going to take us way longer, because I don't think we're ready to go to town halls with the documents that we have. And I don't disagree with you that I think the closure should say closure plus mitigations. I think that there's a lot of discussion about these sorts of matrices. And I mean, so yeah, I'd love to hear from others. So if you have any other comments, I'll pick it up with others. Yes, Tony, I see you. I got to let Dave finish, and then I'll call on you.
Oh, thanks. I am done. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so I have, Tony, did you have something specific to what Dave just said, or because otherwise I have Greg and then Phil and then you?
Yes, it's related, sort of related to Dave, but it's a bigger picture than what Dave was just talking about. Do you want me to do it now or later?
Sure, go for it.
The issues that Dave are bringing out, like looking at each cell in the matrix and discussing it, I think there's a better process. I think we should all talk about each cell together. But bigger than that, I think the evaluation criteria, at this point, we know a lot more about these criteria than when council first put them in. And I think we have, like Dave was alluding to, some criteria more important than others. And for instance, minimize right to way, but you get the picture. Some criteria are more important and some are less. And I think we should weight them together to tell us which ones are more important than others. And then again, rather than using kindergarten colors like blue, orange, and red, I think we should start using numbers and start saying this is a 2.5 or a 2.6, but in relation to how important it is. And then you come up with multiply them together and you find out which the best option is. So that's my suggestion. I think firstly, we need to discuss them one at a time. For instance, Dave mentioned the viaduct at G, the reduced rail noise. The consultant says the viaduct is the least noisy. Now, we need to think about that, discuss it, see how important that is compared with taking away right of way. So I think that our process should be discuss each cell and weight these criteria now that we know a lot more about it than when we first put them there. Lastly, I just wanted to thank staff. It's a lot of work and we can nitpick it, but overall it's a very good picture. I hope we can start refining them and adding numbers to them, because if we can't count them, it doesn't exist.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, I'm gonna go to Greg followed by Phil, and I just want to do a time check. So it's already 5:07. We're of course over as we usually are. And we'll have to understand whether this is something that we need to bring back for another meeting and spend a whole meeting on, because honestly, if we go cell by cell, block by block, it's gonna be a while. And you know, I think before I let Greg and Phil speak, I just want to pull back the lens. You know, the concept of defining what your success is, like what is the outcome that you're looking for versus just trying to rank what you have, I think is something that's a worthwhile discussion at some point. So I think we should think about that. All right, I'll let Greg go and then Phil.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this matrix is almost the core of what we're here to do. So I don't know if there's a process whereby we can come to some agreement. Maybe it's an offline process that doesn't require us to have a 3-hour meeting. But I know that I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 boxes that I'm not sure I agree with the conclusion. If you'd like, I can tell you about all 7 boxes now, or we can talk about it in some other forum.
Yeah, honestly, Larry, do you have any suggestions on what might be a most efficient way to do this? Because I'm with you. I'd want to have each person kind of go through and vocalize them, but that's also going to chew up a lot of time. We also have the problem of what happens if 5 of us think one box should be orange and 5 of us think it should be blue. What are we doing? And so I'm not really sure or clear about what is the best way to drive this process.
Well, are we adopting these sheets, whether they're fact or summary or overview, are we adopting them as our own, or we let them stay where they are right now? They're the consultants, and they're the consultant's opinion. That's where I'm more comfortable, frankly, rather than us getting in there and grading it, because that is, I think each individual can take a look at those charts and make an individual determination. I'm not, actually, I think Tony's idea of a numerical ranking, I think was discussed at one point on the city council and rejected. And I think that was probably the right decision, because I think people generally come to an overall conclusion and then back into the numbers if you're using numbers. So I wonder whether the whole process is really what we want to be spending our time on.
Larry, do you worry though that if, so sure, this can be AECOM's color-coded system and not ours, but to the extent that we come up with something that doesn't jive with any of their color things, do you think that we face a level of pushback from the community of like, well, the consultant said this was blue and you went with it and it was a red to us, you know, or vice versa? I don't know.
Well, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. We may very well disagree with the consultant. And I think if we do on a particular thing, we ought to say so in our report, that the consultant said this was going to be the most beautiful. This is going to be the most beautiful overpass the world's ever seen. And we say, no, we think it's going to be ugly.
It's prettier than the Golden Gate Bridge. So I'm going to make my first point more quickly, and then my second point. So a couple general things then, and then rather than going into too details, I do think that we're giving too much happiness to the 2 underpass options in column A, given that not all of the turning movements are supported. So by saying that those are as good for facilitating movement across the corridor as all the other options, I think is not really fair. I think the same thing goes with the underpass options, both of them for row C, which is safe routes for pedestrians and cyclists. Yes, I know that we don't have all the details on pedestrians and cyclists, but if I look at what's planned for Churchill, I don't see how we would ever have a situation that is as nice as some of the other options. I'll make one other point, which is that it says in here, as we just discussed, with the elevated track, train wheel noise could radiate out, which can be mitigated. The noise consultant didn't seem to agree with that, or maybe he just assumed that the mitigation would be there. And then finally, I'm going to make a probably more important point, which is that this chart is not accessible, being that about 4% of the world population is colorblind. And this information, it's not completely presented only by color. A colorblind person could actually read all the words and come to their own conclusion. So maybe we should either take the colors out or put a number in. So that's all. Thanks.
So if I can just chime in really quickly, I just want to mention that the colors weren't solely determined by AECOM. So these are not the consultant's colors. Consultant in the city worked on developing these colors. And I think actually through input from the XCAP, and we are more than happy to modify the colors should XCAP feel that one of the colors is way off or is even slightly off, frankly. I think that's kind of the input we're looking for. But as has been mentioned, there might be some things where you can't get consensus. And frankly, some of these things are in the eye of the beholder. Some person might consider, something to be beautiful, and somebody,
I think especially the visual one is especially in the eye of the beholder.
That's right.
Visual intrusion. I mean, I saw some of those plans I saw for the partial underpass that looked like a lot of visual intrusion to me.
Yeah, so I think that's exactly my point. So I think those are the ones where you might have some difficulty. But to Larry's point, I understand if you feel XCAP that you don't want to make a decision on these. But I think from our perspective, we'd love to have your input into how we should present these. If you can reach a consensus on these. Now I know that does sound like I'm asking you to do the painstaking task of going through each and every one of those. So I'm not sure what the best process, or if we want to bring this back, or if you want to break it up, or if you just want to kind of go from a high level and just take each one and say this one looks like it's right. To your answer on the colors, I don't know if Millette or Peter can speak to whether we've addressed issues for colorblind accessibility. My dad's colorblind, so I'm sensitive to that. I can send it to him and ask him if he can identify, although there are different types of colorblindness. That said, I think we had actually spoken. I don't know if it came up at the city council, but we've definitely talked with XCAP about, should we assign numbers? Should we make this a scale of 5 so that it's, really, so there is a middle choice? These are kind of, we're open to this, to whatever feedback. And I guess what could come out of this discussion, a potential option, is that you say, hey, change this to a scale of 5, or change it to a numerical, or change it to 5 different colors that are not going to be ones that are hard for somebody that's colorblind. If we should change that actually right away, so we can look into that. And then maybe some of the ones that you want us to come back with and have a further in-depth discussion or whether maybe XCAP wants to further deliberate. So just putting that out there.
I'll just point out that they are numbers. They're just numbers represented as colors. And
Yeah,
I'll shut up. Sorry.
Exactly. Can I suggest both numbers and colors for people who don't relate to colors?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly was going to recommend that. I mean, your scale at the bottom, you could just put a number, 1 through 5 on there that represented those. It's not anything you're going to tabulate, but you would know 5 is the red, and 1 is the dark blue, if that's a concern.
It would seem like a 2 to 0 to -2 would be something you might consider. And then you might really want to generate a score, because the colors don't really let you do an overall evaluation. Because otherwise you kind of go, well, I got 3 blue boxes here, 2 light blue, and you're trying to make a decision of which one's better. And it may be really hard to do that if they're just color based.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge we have is ultimately, I don't think that XCAP is using whatever color coding or whatever number system we come up with to decide this, to Larry's point, right? This is really just, but I'm also cognizant that we're being asked to develop what potentially is going to be the thing that drives both the greater public at large and potentially the council towards some kind of solution. And, for the reasons I've stated previously, I just don't think we've developed, I think the criteria is old. It was meant to be reevaluated. It sort of never was. And, this process has gone on long enough that we've kind of just worked with it. but a real question about whether the new alternatives mean that we should probably relook at the evaluation criteria, but that opens up all sorts of other cans of worms and frankly adds to the timeline, which is what I wanted to.
We talked earlier today about keeping this at a higher level of abstraction and doing the trades and say, yes, some of these things aren't perfectly polished, but we expect that there's some risk there, but that we could polish it. But if you're here scrubbing every little box, then we're just going against that whole high level of abstraction.
Yeah, I agree. Well, so with that, if there, besides color coding, which it sounds like there might be some questions about, are there any other substantive comments in terms of the wording or things that are missing that this group wants to go through? So Greg, you still have the floor, and then I can go into Phil and then Keith.
Yeah, like I said, I question the wording around noise, and I'll that's what.
Phil, you're muted. Phil, unmute yourself.
Okay, so my first reaction to the chart is that I'm wondering why we're still even showing the alternatives that we've kind of ruled out. That is, for Meadow Charleston, why are we even showing the tunnel alternatives? I think it may be misleading to the public, and in any case, it makes some of the pages really hard to read because we're trying to jam so much information onto one page.
So I sorry to say this, but I understand that XCAP is no longer considering these the tunnel option, but that doesn't mean that until you take something to council and tells them to remove that option from consideration, there is an expectation that council could still consider that.
All right. Could we break it out into a separate page entitled options that XCAP has ruled out, if only to improve clarity of the slide of the pages? Because this, this page one is damn hard to read. And I'll go back to Tony's theme about when you get older, not only your ankles get a little dodgy, but so does your eyesight. Okay, the second comment is very specific to line G on the first page. There's inconsistent usage there's inconsistent wording. For some boxes we talk about electric engines, and the last box we talk about electric motors. Neither one is correct. It should really be electric trains as opposed to a diesel engine hauled train. Beyond that, I think that we do need to probably schedule more work. Oh, I hate to say this on the numeric scores. I'd like to add that I think if we are going to do numerics, it should be -2 or something like that to +2. Otherwise, 1 to 7 would be meaningless. But a -1 average would be very significant as opposed to a +1.5 average. Those are my comments. Oh, one final point, I'm sorry. Whether we adopt these charts as our own or whether we say this is AECOM's, I don't think the public is going to see that distinction. What the public will see on virtual town halls or elsewhere is these are the fact sheets. These are the evaluations. If you didn't want us to see them, then if you don't support them, then don't show them to us. So I don't think we have a choice in this matter. Okay, thank you. I'm done.
Thanks. Keith?
Yeah, that was my point, is that if this is just to guide us, to make us think and look at all the points and organize our thoughts for our deliberations, fine. I think that it does the job. But if we're distributing to the public, we are setting ourselves up for a lot of pain. In particular, some of the things that, for example, underpass, turning motions at Meadow. I'm confident that we can come up with something that supports all 8 turning motions, but the current design doesn't have that. And or bike ped. Right now, the bike ped connections are not good. I think with some work, we could have bike ped connections improved. How do you represent that where we think it can be improved, but how do you color code that? That's just so difficult. And I think it's gonna be really painful for the public and painful for us if we present this.
Thank you, Keith. Yeah, I have the same concerns. Like I just think that we are setting ourselves up for going to a town hall with potentially charts that don't really show the full level of work that we envision. And so we're ranking these things based on sort of partial work. So yeah, specifically on row G, which is noise and vibration. I think there's a difference between how you color things for noise versus for vibration. And I'm wondering if that needs to be split into 2 rows there. Also in the on the Meadow Charleston row G, the last column, it says the use of electric motors rather than diesel engines will reduce noise. Train wheel noise can be increased at the bridge location depending on structure type. However, this noise can be mitigated. It also can be mitigated along the right of way at grade, which I don't know how to represent that in there. So again, I think the noise color coding would be different from the vibration color coding, because that's what I recall that the noise and vibration memo said. And so question about how to represent that. Let's see, other color issues. I agree that the under Meadow Charleston D, under the hybrid, that should probably be an orange. It shouldn't be a light blue. And also under N for Meadow Charleston, which is the utility relocations. The one next to it is major utility relocations for Lowood Road, and one is red, one is orange. Is there a reason for that, Millette? Is it maybe the degree to which the utility relocations, or was that meant to be red?
Yes, it is the degree. The hybrid, you only have partial lowering, whereas the tunnel, there's extensive lowering. So major, more major.
Yeah, so maybe just some kind of word rather than just the color that delineates the difference between the type of utility relocation that made you color it differently might be helpful. Then let's see, I have here for Charleston. For Charleston, under engineering challenges, under letter P for the underpass, you have lane reduction on Alma Street during construction of the shoe fly and a bridge. The question is maybe. I mean, I think that we need to put the caveat that it depends on the construction methods, right? And so hard to understand how to color those when we know that there's a potential there. And I was struggling like Dave about sort of there isn't really a neutral color. And so another example would be for Meadow Charleston on D, support continued railroad operations and Caltrain service improvements under the underpass. You know, depending on whether or not you have shoe fly tracks, you would color that orange or you might color it blue. And I just don't know how to, you know, without knowing more, we can't really color code those appropriately. So those are kind of the high level ones that I had. The other one is there's a difference between the improvements for bike peds versus cars. So on Churchill, letter H, we have it's color coded orange. Diversion of regional traffic with Churchill Avenue closure will be mitigated, but it doesn't show that for bikes and peds you would actually have a crossing right there, and that would actually make that a blue. And so, you know, a question of whether we need to break that out. That for automobiles that's an orange, but for bikes and peds that's a blue. So Carrie, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand up. Otherwise, I would have let you go first.
Oh, that's okay, Nadia. I just had a couple of comments. So one was about how we present ownership of this information. It's very clearly branded with the City of Palo Alto logo. So if we're not going to stand behind that, that needs to change. And then just thinking about the way that we've presented this, and I recognize that this is not a perfect analogy, so bear with me on this. In software design, when we are considering something like this, we have a severity and a priority. So my question for us to think about is, are all of our evaluation criteria equal? And maybe the answer is yes. But if it's not, it would be interesting to know, to have some grouping so that we can understand, well, yes, this has oranges, but all the oranges and reds are in the lower priority aspects of the issues the criteria we were evaluating, you know? So that's just one thing to throw out there in terms of how to understand and process this very complex, detailed matrix, right? We have to find a way to understand it and to take action on it. So I also liked the comment about the potential of improving. I'm sorry, I don't remember who said that, but the idea that what we've discussed so far might be light orange, but we could make we believe that with further study, we could come up to a solution that was light blue. It would be nice to capture that. So in other words, the improvement potential of some of these ideas. It's especially if we keep it abstract, if we go with what our current understanding is, but we think we can improve it upon further study, we should indicate that with a symbol of some kind, like a star. I don't know. And then the persona idea, just want to bring that up again. Nadia, you just mentioned this. Understanding that the color ratings may be different for bikes, pedestrians, vehicles. I think that is something we could do. It would look similar to this matrix, but it might have, if there was a difference, you could have a little icon in there that this is different for pedestrians or something like that, and you could color code the icon. So just, these are not necessarily material suggestions, but presentation and analysis suggestions. Just wanted to throw those ideas out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, Larry, and then Tony.
Well, having listened to all of the very good comments various members of the committee made, I feel even more strongly that we ought to relabel this. I think Nadia was right. This isn't necessarily a fact sheet, but I would go even further. I would say this is have it titled report of the consultant, report of the staff, and have a disclaimer in there saying that this is not necessarily the opinion of the XCAP. Because I think that trying to get a consensus or going through these charts cell by cell is not a good use of our time. We've already talked about how we have feeling a lot of time pressure. And this is nothing unusual. It's those of you who have been saying, well, the citizens are going to think this is ours. Well, one, disclaim it up front, because we've already disclaimed that the town halls are not the XCAPs. They're the city staff's meetings. We say that every time we've had a town hall. And this is nothing new. The city has reports from consultants all the time that the Planning Commission and the Utilities Advisory Commission prepare, and those advisory groups review those reports and agree or not agree. And the citizens are quite well used to seeing the consultant's report and accepting it that it's not necessarily the opinion of the advisory group. And I think we can make that clear and save ourselves a good deal of time. Now, when we go to write a report, we can say, and I think we should, or we disagree with what the consultant has said. If the consultant has said something's important and we think it's they've missed the boat with them, then we say so. And we do, and the city does that all the time. So I just think we're setting ourselves up for more work than we really need to do.
Thank you. Tony, and then I see Dave, and then Carrie, did you still have your hand up or was that from before? Okay, and then I see Greg. So Tony, Dave, and then Greg.
So I sort of agree with Larry that we should say that this is not our, put a disclaimer on there that says that this is not our work. But just listening to the discussion here, I think that we really need to start looking at for instance, Nadia's brought up the issue of separating pedestrians from bicyclists. Some alternatives do well with bicyclists, some do horribly with pedestrians. You need to separate those out, I think. For instance, another one that you brought up, the issue of reduced rail noises and vibration, that could be separated based on our consultant numbers. The issue of support continued rail operations is not as important as providing safe routes to school. I mean, it's assumed that we are going to, that Caltrain is going to continuous service. It's not as important. And so this matrix is not weighted in the correct manner. And I think we're having that kind of problem. And I think we should be doing it together to weight these options. Otherwise the matrix looks blue and pink and light blue, and you can't really tell which one's good and which one's not good here. I mean, I really think you should also add numbers, because it's not fair to people who don't see it, and I don't see it fully right. That's why my buildings are mainly white. So.
Okay, so I have Dave and then Greg, and then we have to go to public comment. So I'll ask you guys to try to be as brief as you can.
Well, hopefully this is brief. After Keith's speaking, I've had an amazing growing sense of unease about this matrix, mostly along the lines of the fact that it only ranks the final state at which the designs have gotten to through this time period. And everything that we do when we put information out there, people just think it's final. And that's a huge disconnect that we have not been able to fix. And it just creates like unneeded, unnecessary angst in everybody. And I think this particular matrix is just going to add fuel to that fire. And I'd urge the city and everybody to consider that this is really just capturing the state of the design as it stands now. And everybody who helped work on the underpass at Metal Charleston could probably say, oh, we could turn all these boxes to blue, whatever. And it might even happen, but that's not the state at which it is now. And so I have a huge anxiety about that right now. Thanks for listening.
Greg?
I just wonder, Carrie mentioned priority and severity, and she probably well knows that everything that's not priority 0 or priority 1 is just ignored. But I wonder if we ought to, I can't promise I'll do this in the next week, but I might do it, should take a crack at making a simplified version of this chart for the XCAP. Does it take property or not? Does Caltrain need an exception or not? And then other things. What does it look like? Eye of the beholder. Is it feasible? Here's how much it's going to cost. There's probably half of this chart could be reduced to, is it neutral or is it bad? And then that probably leaves us with 3 or 4 columns that we could actually debate about. So I don't know if anybody, I might noodle on it next week, but this seems like something that maybe as an XCAP we should try to produce as our own simplified version of the evaluation criteria that's not quite so. It's a lot of work that went into this, and I really appreciate the staff did all the work that they did. This is important, but I don't think it's a great decision-making tool for us as it stands.
I'm interested.
Yeah, so I just got an email from Carrie that I think she was actually just ahead of you there on that thought, Greg, that I think she'd like to do that. I mean,
I would love to see that. Yes,
that's something that
Okay.
I think would perhaps make sense if we could follow up offline, and potentially then we bring that back to XCAP for XCAP to discuss.
If it's okay with Nadia, you can share a spreadsheet with me and I'll look at it next week or whatever.
I mean, I'd love.
Awesome.
I think we should discuss the entire thing probably offline, because I think
Okay.
it's exciting, but could also have other pitfalls. And so,
Again, I'm operating at a high level of abstraction here, and I may not know what I don't know, but it seems to me that a lot of it here could be vastly simplified, and we could focus on the 3 or 4 rows that are going to be really important to us.
I agree.
Okay.
In Swiss planning.
I have some. Nadia.
Oh, hi, Enyang. Yeah, sorry, we didn't hear you.
Okay, so just I have. I agree that leave this as. Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Can
yeah.
you hear me?
Yes.
Go ahead.
As the consultant report, and in order to read this chart, maybe we could we create a another important chart or table.
Oh, Enyang, I'm really sorry, but your phone is cutting in and out. We can't hear what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I have a bad internet access. So, can you hear me now?
Yeah. I don't know if you move near a window, maybe that'll help.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
So
you know, whatever the Greg is cracking at it, it should be work as a navigating point to look at this table, right? Because if somebody's looking at this table, it will take so long to digest. So whatever it's relevant for us people to look at, whatever it's relevant at this time frame, maybe we could produce something to, you know, focus it. And so like something is not important, maybe, you know, they don't have to look at it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So I think so we can do this like divide it into conquer. So some people who are interested in particular area, like you could have a task force looking at Churchill thing or Meadow thing, and you know, whatever it's really important to, you know, we just create another table or whatever report to look at this, you know, prioritize where to look at first.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Anyway, that's my comment.
Thank you. So I do see that we have 7 members of the public who would like to speak. We are way over on time. Now we have 8, now we have 10, 11. So I suspect that this item is going to have to come back. So I am going to limit comments to 1 minute because otherwise we're going to be way over. And I apologize in advance to everybody, but you can always send us an email at xcap@cityofpaloalto.org, I believe it is, or .com. Don't quote me, but you can go to the website. And you can also send us comments that way. Again, I'm really sorry. We do want to hear from you. So please don't take this as a, we're not interested. It's just, it's been a long meeting already. And this item will probably come back for sure. So with that, I'll turn it over to my timer.
Okay, our first public speaker is Ken Joy. Please unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
I should start by saying thank you. I didn't say that last month when I spoke to the group. XCAP staff and consultants have done a lot of work, and I want to make sure I say thank you out loud. Given 1 minute, I want to focus on something that was on the spreadsheet, responses to comments about the fact sheets. The consultant talked about Carlson Court, and I think the response from AECOM ignores the fact that other alternatives don't have a 2-way bike ped ramp. And addressing that issue in the design phase would not be a subtle improvement. That phrase, subtle improvement, was used elsewhere in the AECOM comments. Given 1 minute response, I'm not going to comment on the matrix. I'll send some information to you in writing. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Eduardo Lack. Please unmute and you can begin to talk now.
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you for thinking about the matrix. I have a number of comments on the matrix. Number 1 is, could we use the wording traffic mitigation and closure for Churchill rather than closure? You have plenty of space to include that. Second is that I would like to ensure that the right-of-way needed for Caltrain is included on page 4 of the partial underpass. So basically at the bottom of the page 4, partial underpass. Lastly, an average of 4% of the people are colorblind, 10% men and 0.5% women. So I think that given that more than 95% of people can see colors, I think it's reasonable to use them. What I would do is focus on a weighted average that takes into consideration cost, because right now cost is white, and yet is a huge difference in cost between, you know, several of the options could be 3, 4, 5, 6 times different. So appreciate you focusing on the important items, the severity items that one of the XCAP members mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is O Hadidi. Please unmute and you can begin to talk now.
Dear XCAP members, I would like to address a comment that was made at the last XCAP meeting, specifically that grade separation projects could possibly be funded by a nationwide infrastructure program. If that is indeed a serious possibility, I would urge XCAP to recommend to the City Council to propose the tunnel as the most suitable candidate for such funding. If cost remains an issue, then we strongly favor the closure of Churchill with mitigations at Embarcadero and Oregon Expressway. We support closure because of cost, safety, traffic friendliness, and preservation of the character of our neighborhood, which would be gravely compromised by the other two proposals that would both present as eyesores to the landscape. Finally, regarding the matrix summaries relating to Churchill, we would suggest the following changes. Number one, change the option label from closure to closure plus mitigations to accurately describe this particular option. Number two is change the color of row A to light blue to reflect the hexagon traffic analysis showing improved traffic at all intersections. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Our next speaker is Elizabeth Alexis. Please unmute and you can begin to talk now.
Elizabeth?
Elizabeth, we cannot hear you.
I think you can skip her.
Okay. Next speaker is Susan Newman. Please unmute and you can begin to talk now.
Okay, thank you. I want to add my thanks to everyone too. This is really a bright group and a lot of extremely good points have been made. Let's see, I can find my stupid comments. I agree with Greg and both Dave and Greg about the importance of the matrix. One, maybe a modified matrix, but one for communicating with the public, and two, for disciplining your deliberations and holding yourself accountable to the public. I know you're going to record your justifications, but being systematic in deliberations might be supported by using some kind of formal criteria. I wanted to add, there's the idea of separating some items out, and I think item H might be a candidate as well. The idea that, let me see if I can find it. Well, I've written it into my notes, but there's this kind of putting together of maintaining access to the parks and neighborhoods, et cetera, and reducing regional traffic on the neighborhood streets. And I think those might be in contradiction with each other. And one other comment I wanted to make was it would be good to, if you decide to rank the criteria, be sure you record where people don't agree on the ranking. And also, could you record somehow criteria that engender a lot of disagreement, that be marked as well?
Thank you. Our next speaker is Q Lee. Please unmute and you can begin to talk now.
Hi, I'd like to provide feedback on Churchill Partial Underpass Plan related to the safety of pedestrian and bikes, which is criteria C. The Churchill Underpass Plan requires to remove landscaping on Alma, and Alma sidewalk is already very narrow. And when there's another person walking toward me, I walk on the landscaping. So without the landscaping, there's no safety features for the pedestrians. Also, there are houses on Alma and they putting their trash bins on the landscaping. Without the landscaping, I think the only space to locate bins is the sidewalk, and that will make it very hard to walk on Alma. And related to the bike ramp on Kellogg, I think the Kellogg ramp is not convenient for those who are not Pali students. Imagine 100 about Pali bikers using the narrow tunnel. It might not be possible to cross Alma in the opposite direction from the Pali student. Thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to seeing updated summary matrices.
Our next speaker is Phil Y. Please unmute and you can begin to talk now. It sounds like you are using older version, so I'm not able to promote you to talk. Okay, our next speaker is Rachel Kellerman. Please unmute and you can begin to talk now.
Hi, I also. Am I unmuted? Hi. I'm sorry. I just want to echo Dave's point that these things are not final. The mitigation plan is something that the folks that live on Embarcadero and north of Embarcadero have many issues with, and we want to make sure that we're engaged as a neighborhood. I believe it was Greg who said when they were talking about reports that it was really important that in the detailed part of the process, neighborhoods who are highly impacted are engaged. And I hope that you include some of that language in your report. Also just want to point out that mitigation plan did not include a study of the number of cars that were going to be coming up Embarcadero. And I believe there's many other things that need to be addressed. So there's just, as someone who's done a lot of community engagement around this issue, I just want to make that point. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Robert Neff. Please unmute yourself and begin to talk now. I believe you are also using an older version of Zoom, so you may have to call in order to provide your public comments. Our next speaker is Richard Perky. Please unmute and you can begin to talk now.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to address a concern that with the matrix in the options for Churchill, that while a lot of work has been done to expand on the two new proposals, the viaduct and the partial underpass, that I don't think the matrix any longer accurately reflects all of the work that's been done on the closure option. And I'll limit this to the comment on row A. So in facilitating move across the corridor, the Churchill Avenue simply says that it closes vehicle traffic, whereas both the viaduct and the partial underpass have language that that describes the measures for pedestrian and bike traffic, which the mitigation measures for the closure option also include. So that language should be made the same. And I think that the color coding for this for the closure option should be changed, given the mitigation measures, to reflect that that with mitigation it should also be reflected in a shade of blue. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Terry Lack. Please unmute yourself and you can talk now.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. And thank you for your work. I can see how hard this is listening today. So I'm going to emphasize what was just emphasized, that there seems to be an error in the matrix, that it's clear that row H talks about the extra driving of maybe some of the Southgate people, that extra quarter of a mile. That's already captured in row H. So row A should definitely be blue, because Hexagon clearly demonstrated that the resulting traffic would be better, not worse. So you're double counting the quarter mile of driving a few people might have in Southgate. So I really strongly ask that you change that row A to blue, because it is definitely better based on the studies. And I thank you again for your hard work. And hopefully we can get this done, right?
Thank you.
I'm under time. I'm great.
Okay. Our next speaker is Robert Neff. Please unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now. Robert, we cannot hear you. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, this time I'm in. Okay, I'm a longtime resident and cyclist living in South Palo Alto, a member of Payback. First, about why the crossing at Kellogg and why not at Seal Park. I think it could be a similar design in either location, and I hope when this is built, we'll put it in the best location. So maybe outside the XCAP process is the right place to figure out where the best location of that is. Second, regarding the underpass plans for Meadow and Charleston, these are incomplete and are designed for cyclists and pedestrians. Many aspects are left to the viewer's imagination, especially the route that bike and ped traffic will take from both sides of the street to the side with the cycle track and back. It is obvious that the plans have broken the connectivity, and it's not clear how it's been fixed in these plans. For example, Meadow shows simple crosswalks for this westbound bicycle traffic. This is inadequate and unsafe. And to make the design as safe as possible, we should have actual active traffic signals there. And so I hope that will be in a future version of the plans. Finally, if you can make the bike lanes 8 feet wide for buffered lanes in Charleston, that would be best. Thank you for your work for the city of Palo Alto.
Our next speaker is Karen Kelensky. Please unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Hi, I'm a longtime resident on East Meadow, and I apologize if I missed discussion of this question, and I realize you can't answer it here. But my question is it still possible that different options could be considered for Meadow versus Charleston, especially if we can't get more than 3 points of connectivity at Meadow and Alma? So it could, for example, be hybrid at Meadow and underpass at Charleston or other possibilities. And thank you all for your work.
Our next speaker is Drew. Please unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Hi again. So I think the colors and the criteria somewhat should be similar across these. So blue across the different options as far as just a comparison, Charleston Meadow versus Churchill. And then within them, there seems to be a conflict between absolute criteria and relative criteria. Like all the engineering challenges are all in these absolutes. So everything's some shade of red, orange, blue, but the first page is all relative. And then on top, and where that's most obvious to me is on Churchill for row E for funding. It's still going to cost 50 to 65 million. And that one is in blue. But if you go back to Meadow Charleston, there's no blue for the cost one. They're all in some shade of red, orange, yellow. So I think that blue should be a light orange or something. That's an example. So there's some internal conflict that just needs to be cleaned up here. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Penny. Please unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Thank you, and thanks for your work. I'm going to make one comment, and I will jump on what Robert Neff said, and I agree with everything he said, so I'm not going to repeat it. But I do want to point out that eliminating train preemption will automatically increase the capacity of all of these intersections. This is going to induce auto volumes once we get rid of that delay. So if we're going to have a criteria that celebrates reduction of delay for motor vehicles, I think we simultaneously need to look at the risk that will create for bicyclists and pedestrians. We need to measure that risk, and we need to mitigate it. So I see a criterion here that offers drivers something. They were talking earlier about, treating different roads users differently. And I think the way we're evaluating this actually treats users differently. And that's going to result in different kinds of decisions. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Joachim Taku. Please unmute yourself and you can talk now.
This is Joachim Taku. I live on the 100 block of Kellogg and XCAP committee. This is the second meeting that I've listened to, and thank you for your service. This is certainly a difficult thing. To preview one of your comments about how the public is going to take the grids and the fact sheets, one of my neighbors who has already spoken and I have talked to approximately 14 households in the block of Kellogg, the 100 block of Kellogg. They are confused about the proposals and are universally opposed to the tunnel. Several things, for you. First, anything that involves the acquisition of private property is probably clearly a red problem. The legal standard for eminent domain is probably not met since you're not sure, if you can hit it. Secondly, parking, it is unclear how far parking is going to be removed on the 100 block. Third, I would think highly about the traffic flow there. So if Kellogg is only 36 feet wide, it's going to be really hard to make turns. And then finally, please keep in mind that Castellea is the 200 block of Kellogg, and routing the approximately 500 plus bicyclists from Palo through Kellogg in front of Castellea pickup is probably not a good thing. Finally, this is very NIMBY-ish, but the residents of Kellogg would prefer and think that a tunnel or a crossing on Seal would be much better. It's equidistant between Oregon Expressway and Embarcadero. Once again, I promise that we will follow up with kind of the 100-block Kellogg comments in written form.
Thank you. Our last speaker is a phone-in caller with the phone number ending in 563. Please unmute yourself and you can talk now.
Hi, thank you so much again for all your time and effort into this complex matter. Yeah, I think all my points were already covered by other people. I just wanted to emphasize that Castellea cars, it's primarily the Castellea students commute via car, and having them come in the same path that Palo bikes are going into is not a good idea, especially since a lot of the Castellea cars use Kellogg to get northbound on Alma after drop off or pickup. These people would be commuting at the exact same time. And also the second point about the sidewalk on Alma, taking away the median would make the sidewalk extremely dangerous. Bicyclists use the sidewalk, right or wrong. Pedestrians do have to go into the median too when crossing. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Elizabeth Alexis. Please unmute yourself and you can talk now.
Elizabeth, we can't hear you. Elizabeth? Okay. I think we can safely say Elizabeth cannot connect.
Yeah. Okay, with that, that concludes our public comments for this item.
Thank you to everyone. I wanted to bring it back. Philip, did you have anything that you were going to clarify?
Yeah, well, just to clarify, I think that, some of the, obviously some of the different alternatives could be compatible at Meadow Charleston, but I think we need to come back and really look at all the different possibilities and really whether they would be completely compatible.
So this is in relation to the member of the public who asked, for example, whether you could have an underpass at Meadow and a hybrid at Charleston, correct?
Yeah. So obviously a viaduct and a hybrid would not be possible, but we'd have to look to see whether a hybrid and an underpass, as an example, might be compatible. I think that's
that would be a very useful chart for XCAP to understand before we go into deliberations.
So public comment on that. So for hybrid, unfortunately, we can't fit a vertical curve after Meadow and in between Meadow and Charleston. So if we're narrowing it down to a hybrid or underpass, both would have to be the same solution.
Okay. And what about between an underpass and something else?
Something else, as in, so with an underpass, it won't work with a trench because you're occupying the same space.
Right.
Underpass,
so I meant with a hybrid and a viaduct, for example.
Hybrid and viaduct, that we haven't looked into. Hybrid and viaduct, we possibly could raise it up at one side to the other, but again, without looking at it from an engineering point of view, we won't know.
Sure, no worries. So just to be clear, I don't think anything other than an underpass would, in other words, if you select the underpass, they both have to be underpasses. Am I getting that right?
Correct. And that's the same, should be the same roughly with hybrid as well. So anything that's going above ground needs to go above ground. Anything that's going below ground, the other option needs to also go below ground.
So there's no mixing and matching of hybrid and partial underpass. Okay.
Unfortunately not.
Can I get some clarity on that real quick? Because I stated kind of
differently in the past. So I just want to make sure we're on the same page here. So Elliot, is it not possible to keep the rail at grade, for example, at Charleston, raise it slightly at Meadow, or even raise it at both, but still provide the same, like, underpass scheme at Charleston, but do a hybrid at Meadow? I don't see why that's not possible.
So we can't get to the full out grade situation, but again, you can possibly get up maybe get it down to like 3 or 4 feet, but that ultimately affects the underpass option. So we'll probably need to relook at it.
Yeah, can we get back to you guys on that? Because I'm not fully understanding what Elliot is saying, so we could talk maybe offline and get back to the XCAP on that.
That'd be great, because I don't understand it either.
Sure.
So, okay, great. All right, well, I think it sounds like we're going to take the matrix conversation offline anyway. And so I think we can move on to XCAP member updates and any working group updates. I don't know if there's anything that anybody's...
So I'm sorry, I just want to confirm what we're doing with the matrix. I'm sorry to stop our forward progress here, and I know we've gone quite a long time, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you want for next steps for the matrix.
Well, so I think there's a lot of consternation about using the matrix. So I think we're going to have a discussion offline, Philip, to understand, if this is something that the city is just going to use, then what do you want to do with the feedback? Because it doesn't sound like it's something that XCAP wants to own. Well, so unless you want me to take a straight up vote on it.
Well, I guess the other thing that I did hear was some request to perhaps modify it or simplify it or make it XCAP's own. So I just wasn't sure if there was any.
Well, so the question back that I was going to have offline, but we can certainly have now, is do we even have budget to do that? What's in the scope in terms of how many more iterations of this do we have?
Well, so I hate, at the risk of divulging this, I think XCAP is not paid nearly enough. Sorry, I don't mean to joke, but I mean, I think Carrie offered to take a stab at simplifying it. And I think if the XCAP wanted to take it and make it their own, I don't think that has a cost implication for our consultant or staff.
Yeah, but we'll have to have the group then decide whether they're going to take Carrie's version or AECOM's version, and then otherwise go back and decide whether we all want it color coded or we want it numbered. And then a question about how that feeds into your town halls process, because in the end, I think what you heard is that XCAP doesn't think we're not using this to make our own decision. It's what you're using for your town halls and how you communicate to council and to the outside world. So it doesn't sound like that's necessarily, it sounded to me that XCAP might come up with their own version, but that's for their own report, but they're sort of distancing themselves from this document.
Yeah, that's actually fine too, if you wanted just to take it and use it as a part of your report and make that simplified version. I just wanted to make sure that you wanted, whether XCAP wanted to take that and modify it as the official version, or if you want us to, note that this is staff's analysis on that, which I did hear some suggestions for that this is staff's analysis of the criteria. And at any rate, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think the XCAP report is our version of it, right? And the matrix is the city's quick and easy.
Great.
Phil, I see you're trying to say something. Go ahead.
I'm concerned that going back to Keith's point about a disaster if we don't do a good job, if we have what's called daylight or dissension or disagreement between the city's version of the matrix and our version of the matrix, or if we disclaim that, I don't think that's good optics for town halls or just for the community in general. So to be blunt, I don't think we have a choice. If we don't like what we have in the current matrix, we have to make it our own and fix it accordingly to give ourselves the best shot at a successful town hall process. Even if we don't own that process, we are still very much impacted by the success or failure of it. Thank you.
Dave, and then Tony.
Regardless, just this message for Phil.
I'd urge you to go and update the older options in that matrix just to reflect current information, no matter what happens to it. Thank you.
You talking to me or to Phil Kamhi?
To Phil. Oh, sorry, Phil Kamhi. Yeah.
Thank you.
Tony?
I agree with Phil. We can put a disclaimer saying it's not our matrix, but eventually these are the substance of what we are asked to do by council. And so we're going to own it sooner or later. So I think the sooner we get to it and make it our own or some version of it our own, the better it will be for optics as well as for a functional choosing of alternatives eventually.
Okay, I think in the interest of time, I think I'll have an offline discussion with Larry and Philip, and we'll kind of go through how much time we have in the schedule, what it would mean, because if we're going to own it, we're going to spend at least another meeting easily to digest this and have to come up with a process to do that offline. And if we're not, then that saves us some schedule time, which we may need for other things. So let me just check with them and bring it back. So I don't think it's ready to take a vote either way.
Nadia, just to confirm, we don't have any direction at this time. We are waiting on your follow-up.
Well, I mean, I think you heard some feedback, but I think the real question is, I mean, it sounds like you'll have to make some changes. Whether or not you decide to accept XCAP's feedback, if you decide to keep it as your own, is for AECom and city staff to decide. So you definitely heard feedback. There's just a question of, is that the last iteration of feedback, or is there going to be more? And that's what I want to make sure we have a robust conversation offline, because I don't want to have scope creep, because that's an issue. And, you know, I also recognize that the longer it takes XCAP, if XCAP wants to own these sheets, we need to hammer those out before you can have your town halls. And all it does is further postpone those town halls.
Nadia, just one quick point. I'm a little confused about what we mean by offline, because I don't think we want to have our discussions offline, and we may run into Brown Act issues.
No, I will. Larry and I will talk with Philip and Ripon to understand what's in the city's budgeted scope of work, understand where we are in terms of the town halls, and then come back. We have a meeting next week for XCAP, which is unusual for us, but we do have Caltrain coming next week. So by next week, we'll have an answer of where we are with this.
So I think she's referring to scheduling.
Yes.
I guess, you know, I know we've kind of gotten sidetracked here, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean for this to be kind of long, but I just want to mention that, you know, that I know that there's been a lot of revisions at this last time, but we've taken these different matrices, versions of them, in fact, to XCAP and received comments on them quite a few times. And so I just want to say that as much as it's easy to say that these are the consultants' matrix or this is staff's matrix, these are the matrix that we've received comments on from XCAP several times. So as we continually incorporate comments from XCAP in these, you know, they are becoming XCAP's matrix or matrices. So at any rate, I think we do need to have an offline discussion about where this goes next.
Yeah, because I think the real challenge is, you know, even when we were discussing the Meadow Charleston underpasses and the Churchill underpass, there was a lot of concern from the technical working group about whether or not we should even go forward with any of the diagrams because they didn't match. So it's even worse to go forth with the matrix for the diagrams that don't match and are not completed, right? It's like a double whammy, and I think that's where we're going to run into some problems. But so we could talk about that. Okay, so unless anybody has anything for item number 5, I think we can probably skip item number 5, which is just XCAP updates. I think we've all sort of updated each other under the main one. Is that okay for everybody? Yes? Okay, so for staff updates, the only question I also had for staff was, where is the city in terms of getting feedback from PAUSD and the city traffic committee and sort of those organizations?
Yeah, so we're actually working right now on, I think, unfortunately, I don't think the city manager was able to join us. I think he planned on joining us, probably got pulled into something, but I believe he had a meeting either today or yesterday with Dawn Austin from PAUSD and talked about when we could potentially bring those things. And I think August 20th, I believe, was the date that they offered us to bring items to PAUSD. Likely City School would be sometime in August as well.
So there will not be any new information related to at least the school district in time for town halls.
No, I think likely that they'd be concurrent. If we're going at August 15th or approximately August 15th for our town halls, on August 20th, PAUSD would mean that we have the town halls live, and potentially people from PAUSD could participate in the town hall at the same time as we're receiving live comments or presentation from them.
And I'm not as familiar with the school side. Is PAUSD's comments the same as what you might get from the City School Traffic Commission or the Safe Routes to School organization? I don't really know how the umbrella organizations work there and how they collaborate, or to the extent they might collaborate. In other words, is one school board member's feedback and another one a very technical bike committees that works for the school's feedback? And how do we incorporate those different levels?
Yeah, I would say they're very different types of groups and feedback.
So does that mean you'll be having a separate meeting with the City School Traffic Committee?
Yeah. So I think City School would likely happen in August as well.
Okay. And so will that go back to payback as well?
Potentially, we're fleshing out the schedule.
Okay.
For the expanded, what we're calling the expanded community engagement right now.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions for staff or anything that?
Actually, I have an update. We were recently working to get the additional data from the Caltrains regarding the noise and vibration report, as well as Caltrains vendor. So we have an update on that one. So just wanted to make sure that we did receive some additional information as it relates to the information that XCAP was requesting in an update of the noise and vibration report. So Caltrain has indicated one thing is that they do not have the actual Caltrain EMU data. They don't have it available yet. And we were trying to get that from Statler as well, and that's not yet available. So we are recommending that we use the EMU data that was in the Caltrain's electrification, noise, and vibration technical report from 2014. And that were the same parameters that we will be using to do the noise and vibration report update. As it regards to the train speed, we did receive that the speed profile from Caltrains. They show that that their express EMU trains were traveling up to 110 miles per hour. However, based on the 2014 EIR and other references, it was suggesting that the new EMU would be limited to 79 miles per hour through Palo Alto region. So our professional opinion at this time is just to use this modified version of the speed profile that includes 79 miles per hour max for the new EMU units. So that.
Okay. And originally it was 50, correct? They had 50.
Yes, in our previous report it was 50. So we will be bumping up to 79 miles per hour. As it relates to the train volumes, the previous report was based on the existing number of trains, and I know XCAP had asked us to look into more about the proposed scheduling in the Caltrains. So the 2014 EIR recommended that the EMU be transitioned from the current diesel to complete replacement to the EMU replacement by 2029. And that suggests about 114 trains per day, which is about 60, and that also includes 16 trains during the peak hours, which is what their suggestion was in that EIR, which is more realistic schedule and makes sense. And that was our recommended option to use in our in the report for the noise and vibration report. The other option, like the moderate growth option that the Caltrains use has 268 trains per day. But what that will do is that will reduce the differentiation between for the noise and vibration on different alternatives, which may not be good at this step for the purposes of alternative selection. So once the alternative is selected, then they will always go through the additional noise and vibration analysis as a part of the environmental impact report. So we suggest that we could use the 114 trains per day which is based on the Caltrans EIR from 2014 of when the EMU transitioned to the full electrification of their unit fleet would be done. So we will update our report and we will bring it back on the July 15th.
Okay. All right. So just to remind ex-cappers, we have a meeting the next 2 weeks, every week going forward. And then I will try to schedule for the next week's meeting where we have Caltrain coming. I'll put up a new timeline showing the discussion that we have today, which I think will mean we'll start to meet every single week until we get this done. So, all right. Well, thank you to everybody for your incredible dedication to this and going an hour and 17 minutes over, but we really appreciate it. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks.